Hey, good morning, good
Boom!
afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Timeless Gamer Show. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the eighth season of Timeless Gamer Show, where our games and bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain timeless. There you go. And this podcast is streaming live now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. For all of our archive videos of previous episodes, you can check our YouTube channel, Timeless Gamer Show, and you can also listen to us in all major audio streaming platforms by searching Timeless Gamer Show. If you're getting your podcasts from there, chances are we're there too. Previously on Timeless Gamers, we reviewed the 2023 thriller biopic Tetris, the movie. For those of you who are curious how they were able to pull off a movie based on falling blocks, go check out our YouTube channel. For today's episode, though, we are going on a voyage to Sega Saturn, its mediocre rise, and its eventual downfall due to Sega's dramas that were happening both externally and internally. Tonight's episode has been brought to us by Viraj and Dan, the hosts of Sega Mega Masters podcast. Speaking of which, let's introduce them. Well, actually, right now Dan isn't here yet. He'll be coming along very soon. But we'd like to introduce first, reintroduce, shall we say, Mr.
Yep.
Viraj Kathadia of the Sega Mega Masters. Viraj, tell
All
us a
right,
little bit
glad
about
to be
yourself.
back
Go
here.
ahead.
Glad to be back here. Today we're talking about Sega Saturn. This
Mm.
is Sega's, shall we say, what number console shall we say? Is this their sixth home console, technically
Let me
speaking?
see. One,
I think it's
two.
fifth gen.
It's fifth generation.
I think it's fifth
console.
generation. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
You had the Mark One in
Mm.
1983.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we called it SG-1000. All right.
Okay.
It was 83. Then you had the Sega SG-1000 Mark II in 1984. Then you had the Mark III, called in 1985, which was rebranded as the Master System, and they put an FM sound unit on their Japanese variant, which we never got in the West in the Master System. That was the Mark IV.
Mm.
Mark V hardware, as we know, is Sega Mega Drive, right? Or the Genesis hardware for the Americans. And they actually named this the Sega Saturn because it was the sixth planet in the solar system. It's the sixth system.
Oh, that's the origin of it. That's why it's called the Sega Saturn. Okay.
Well, Sega did have, it's just a coincidence, I think, because Sega did have their planet products. There was Project Mercury, which is known as the Game Gear, the Sega Venus, which was meant to be their successor 16-bit handheld, which you can see a prototype of because it leaked a few years back, but it later became the Nomad. And obviously they had the Sega Earth, and now it's ambiguous to call the Sega CD Sega Earth, but as you see in the BIOS, the planet Earth is actually shown. So you have that. So you're guessing that's the Earth around their little solar system. And the Mega Drive was famously known as Project Luna. That's the funny thing. That's when they went all celestial. It's Mark V hardware. And then, Project Mars was the 32X, okay, which we'll talk about in a bit because that's related to this. And the Project Jupiter was meant to be a solid state success. It was meant to be a cartridge-based 32-bit successor, which never happened. And they went with the CD-based successor, which was Saturn, and they kept the name as Saturn. And then I don't think they did a Sega Uranus because the name was just so stupid.
I mean, you can imagine the wordplay that'll be happening with that one.
And there was, however, a Sega Neptune, which is basically a Genesis and 32X in one. And you can see the picture online. Just to say the Sega Neptune, it's basically a Genesis system with a 32X built in. Yeah. You can argue that could actually very well be Project Jupiter, but anyway. Then the next one is the Sega Pluto, which is fundamentally a Saturn with modem built in, and we can see, and that did actually happen, but there was a prototype model that somebody's got somewhere. I think there were like 3 of them. But today we're talking about Sega Saturn. There we go. This is the
Sega Saturn,
all its glory. Let's have a look at that. So JDM Zane, looking good, people. Good to see you here.
Yeah.
So Raymond's here. Oh, good evening, good morning, everyone. Watching from Saturn. He's out there, isn't he?
Absolutely, yes.
So, what should we say? How do we begin with this system? I mean,
tell us. Yeah, let's begin by telling us a little bit about the background of it. Like what is its place in history? When did it come out, and what was its unique selling point, shall we say?
What do I say about this machine? I mean, All right, so I'll try not to
You're
get emotional, right? Because it's a subject. It's very tender. It's a tender subject for me still about
okay.
Sega, what they did. Okay, so as we all know what a Genesis is. Okay, that shouted
Yes.
the loudest. That was arguably the most successful of Sega systems, arguably.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
Sega knew that. Well, Sega of America. This is due to Sega of America predominantly, because in Japan, the Mega Drive was not a very successful, or as successful as Sega wanted it to be. Okay, let's put it that way. It was a runaway success in Europe. Okay, and in America, it did very, very well as well. Genesis, it really did give Nintendo a bloody nose. It was the underdog.
Yes.
And from 1992 to 1993, Sega had developed a 63% market share in the gaming market. It was basically a David and Goliath story as to what Sega did to take on Nintendo. And I'm very proud of the work that Tom Kalinske did and his team at Sega of America when he became president. And that's where our story should begin, I think, when he became president. The Mega Drive was a success. And Tom did say, I remember in an interview, that they needed to make games in CD. They knew that format of the future. Sega knew this. And it's not like it was an original idea, because NEC also knew this, who made the PC Engine, or otherwise known as the TurboGrafx 16 in America. Now, they made a CD add-on for their system, and Sega, seeing the benefit of this, also made their own version, and they were going to do it anyway with the Sega Mega CD or Sega CD. Now, this thing increased the clock speed of the Mega Drive, so it's more powerful as a system. It could do sprites, it could do scaling sprites and all whatnot. But it was an experimental project to make the best they could, and they knew they could do FMV video and all sorts of things with this device. But again, it was very expensive for what it was, and it was a step in the right direction, because they knew that CD would have to be the future. And because they've already got games in CD, they knew they could make that. The successor model would eventually be a CD system. The problem was there was a conflict between Sega of America and Sega of Japan, and Sega of Japan not being transparent with Tom Kalinske of Sega of America, because Tom Kalinske said to them, "Oh, what about the 32-bit machine? What are we? How can we make 32 bits work for us? How can we design it? We could do this." He looked at making deals with a lot of Western technology companies. So to begin with, he went to Lockheed, which is a British aerospace company, to look at making graphics for this system.
Lockheed, very famous for the was it the Blackbird, the SR-71?
That's correct. Yes, very
Yes.
famous for that. That's amazing. But it was going to be a powerful system, and Tom really was all about the hardware as well. But Hayao Nakayama, who was the CEO, the big guy in charge of Sega, because Sega CSK is a Japanese company, he said, "No, don't worry about that yet. You just focus on the Mega Drive or the Genesis and making it popular." There's our man Tom Kalinske there when he was young. And again, I believe he got shot down for that. And then he said, "Okay, well, let's try something else." And then Silicon Graphics, who made the Voodoo graphics cards.
Oh, Silicon Graphics was a big name way back
Big
when.
name. I think they've been bought over by Nvidia or another company now. But they were big for graphics back in the 90s, and they made graphics cards for PCs. Now, in that era, Nintendo were also there, and they were looking at making a CD add-on for their Super Nintendo called the PlayStation Project, which we know about. Okay.
Yes.
Which eventually they fell out, and that's an episode on its own. What happened? But,
yeah.
In the end, the Sony PlayStation became a thing out of that, was born from that conflict between Nintendo and Sony. So they knew that CD was the future as well. Nintendo sort of had an idea, but that was another thing altogether. Now, so Sega of America, like, why is Sega of Japan shooting us down with us? Because we want to make this thing. We want to make this thing. We want to make a 32-bit success. So Mega Drive or the Genesis is doing really well here in the West. What's going on? And he was then told, "Look, don't worry about the 32-bit successor. We here in Japan, we're taking care of that. We'll look after it. Why don't you make a stopgap system for you in America? Why don't we make Hayao Nakayama ordered Tom Kalinske, and this is in Tom Kalinske's words, to make this 32-bit thing called the 32X. Okay, the add-on for the Mega Drive. Now, this thing used very similar DNA to the Saturn. Okay, so I'm guessing the blueprints or whatever and the hardware specs. So I don't know what is true and what isn't at this point. Even though he was ordered to make it, that the two Hitachi processors that process the 3D environment, shall we say, for the 32X is very similar to the 32X architecture. Sorry, the Saturn architecture that eventually became a thing. Not as powerful. They made this thing. Now, as we know, I think this is where Sega's reputation got really damaged because of this hardware that was released. Now, here is 1994 now, okay? November, December 1994, Sega launched the 32X in America and Europe, okay? And it has like three games on release. I think Star Wars Arcade was the one that really stood out. Virtua and Doom. And the port of Doom was notoriously not the best for Sega Mega Drive. So for the Sega 32X. And it was $150. That was the sort of proper proposition of that console. And the idea was it's a budget step before we launched the 32X. That was their thinking. And, people paid money for this thing. It wasn't as popular as it should have been, but people bought it. And those people who bought it were burned because that same Christmas in Japan, the Sega Saturn drops. Boom. Okay. People, obviously, the news and journalists were saying, well, Sega have launched the, this thing in Japan. This is their true console for 32-bit. This is the future. Why are people paying, for a 32X? What's the point? What's going on here? So that confused people. And the 32X, everybody hated it. Okay. The developers hated it. Okay. The retailers hated it. The customers hated it. Okay. I'm sure even voices in Sega themselves hated it. Okay, so it went out the window within a year and a bit, maybe, stayed on shelves, and it got discounted heavily. And now it's worth a fortune now if you want a 32X. You want your money for it.
I have to admit that era was it started a lot of confusion in gamers. The 32X was very like, all right, this looks like it's the next big thing, but it's kind of like an add-on to the Genesis. It really just threw people for a loop, I guess.
This is it. And then eventually, and that was a surprise release. And the problem was Sega of Japan weren't talking to Sega of America. Sega were a bit America like, well, what's this? They didn't even know about the Saturn drop-in Japan or whatever, and they didn't know where they were going to go with it. And then, under orders by the main CEO, they say 1995 comes along. It's the summer of 1995. Tom Kalinski's ordered to talk about this big thing here, this beast.
Nice one. There it is. For those of you in the audio podcast portion, Viraj is now showing us his actual console of the Sega Saturn.
There we go.
Nice and black.
It's dirty, but it's been in the dust. Shows you how often I play it.
Yeah, it's.
But yeah, you got
it's still a very handsome machine, though.
Yeah, I think it's got. I'll tell you one thing I'll say about Sega. I like the designs of their machines. I think in terms of console design and the aesthetics of them, they get better marks than the competitors. I love them about their retro machines. It's a CD-based system, as we know, and I've got Sega Ages Volume 1 in there. You can see what I play now. So there you go. Last game I played. So yeah, if you got the unit, you got a slot here, not for Genesis cartridges like a lot of people might have thought. This is for RAM carts. So you can expand the memory, and we'll talk about that in a bit when we get to the software.
It would have been so cool if it was backward compatible with Sega Genesis, wouldn't it?
If only they did. And again, we'll talk about mistakes Sega made during this era. But we'll get to that. We've got two sockets here for the controllers.
Okay.
No multi-taps available. And if you look at the back of the unit, you have your sort of AV out and communicator leads as well. And you also have your figure 8 power lead. And also you have, oops, I dropped it.
No problem.
Memory. And you also have like the batteries in there that regulates the BIOS clock in there. So there's CR 2032 battery. It's gone flat. I need to change it. But what a lot of people use this slot for now is when they mod the Saturn with a satiator, they just slide that in there. Oops. They just slide it in there and they just put their games in there and they're done. That's a lazy way to just mod a Saturn, but there's so many ways you can mod it, and that's another discussion as well. And that's what a lot of people are doing now because, as some of us know and are aware, Saturn collecting is a king's ransom. Yeah, the way you pay for the software for some of these really good collectible stuff. Panzer Dragoon Saga. I'm looking at you. I'd have to take out a mortgage for that game, and others too. There's some very obscure RPGs on there that people like to go for, but we'll touch on the software later on throughout this podcast. But this is fundamentally the Saturn in all its glory when it launched. in 1995. This is the Model 1. There were two models of this. The Model 2 had round buttons, as some of you may very well be aware at home watching this.
And if I remember correctly, am I misremembering that there are two different color sets of the Sega Saturn? There's the black one right there, and there's the gray one, if I remember
there's
correctly.
the grey one, but there were others. There was a white one. There was a high Saturn. There were different variants in Japan region. Of Saturns. There was actually a Saturn you could buy where you could actually have a monitor attached to it, like a PS1.
Oh, what? That would have been very cool. I like that. I always like that combo.
So that, obviously back then Sega had a very good relationship with Hitachi, you know, and
Hitachi, yes.
So the thing with this is, if you actually look at this is out of all three of those systems of the fifth generation. I say the three major systems because obviously there's the Atari Jaguar and Panasonic 3DO, which we don't talk about, but maybe we should one day. But the three big players were Sega, Nintendo, and Sony. Okay. Those three, this is probably the most complicated piece of architecture you're going to get in terms of what went into making this thing. It was ridiculous how much money they threw into developing this carbuncle, and I use the word carbuncle. It's not even the correct definition of carbuncle, but what I mean by carbuncle is it's just a hodgepodge of stuff they've put together in terms of its design. It's a very complex piece of architecture that's over-engineered, and that's why those people who know I'm talking about home to emulate this thing is a bit of a pain. It is a pain. It's a pain. Because of just how much power it used. And we'll get to that too, because it had not one, all right? It had two dedicated processors in it. Two. Okay? The sound, there was a third one dedicated for it with Yamaha. Okay? Now, they had...
Yamaha, another really big name.
Another big name. And I think I touched this on the music episode with Yamaha and the sound from this device. But we'll touch on the sound as well. But with the two chips they use, the VD, you got the FH1 DSP and you got the 32 channels of sound. There we go. It's written there in the little video we got playing there. You had a lot of you had the most channels of sound. So yeah, let's just do with the sound. It had the best sound out of all three, the Sega Saturn. That's one thing I'll say for it. It had the best sound in terms of capabilities. It is the best.
I mean, with a big name like Yamaha behind the sound of it, it can't possibly have anything less. About the only thing that might surpass it would be a Korg, probably.
Yeah. But then again, you'll have to pay. They must have paid a lot of money for getting that custom Yamaha chip in there to get them mass produced and put into this unit. And with Hitachi, with the two graphics, you got the VDP1 and you had the video. You had two video processor chipsets in there. As you can see here, it's written. We've got the video playing on the side. It had two dedicated, and one of them was just better at rendering sprites than the other, and that's why they put it in. Because with Sony now, with the PlayStation coming out there, they definitely wanted to push the 3D aspect of it, and they put that on there because they wanted an early sort of release. And you can see one has obviously it takes care of the backgrounds, one doesn't. You see one's disabled or whatever. One does better rendering and may give you smoother images on the pixels or whatever. So one had something the other didn't have, but it was complex to program for because of these two processes. And it wasn't fully utilized until maybe 1998, but by then it was too little, too late. This is the thing.
Well, right now it's since we're talking about the audio, a pertinent question has been brought up here by JDM, one of our panelists, who sadly couldn't make it today, but has a very pertinent question. Question for Viraj and Sergio: can it play audio CD and Redbook audio like the PS1?
It certainly can. It's a CD player too. It is a CD player too. So it'll do the same thing a PlayStation does in that regard. It does it just as well. The audio on this device is really good, and I think the people always say what had the better graphics, the PlayStation or the Saturn. They're pretty much evenly matched, if we're being honest, because there are some games that just look better on Saturn than PlayStation. They were 3D games. So Street Racer, for example, if you pull up a side-by-side comparison of both those games, you realize the Saturn version is superior because it had better backgrounds. And one thing that Sega Saturn could do is it could process backgrounds and give you much more depth perception than PlayStation.
You did mention this a little bit earlier, Viraj, when we were off camera. I think you mentioned that Saturn was striving for arcade quality graphics and ports, right?
Yeah. So we'll get to my software library in a bit because I've got quite a few arcade ports there. But
okay,
Sega, as we know, they came from the arcades.
Yes,
okay? They had their System 16, which was their main arcade board, which made them such a big hit, along with the special X board, which made Space Harrier a thing, and
Mm.
Afterburner a thing, and that really did make them come up there in the arcades. And if we continue looking at their innovations, in 1992, I think 92, 93, when Virtua Fighter came out, which is their first Model 1 game, I believe, opened up a
Mm.
lot of eyes because it's a 3D fighting game. And as we, Edge Res, he's already touched on it, fighting games on Saturn. The best will touch on that as well. They innovated even further with Model 2, Model 3 hardware. And then they eventually went with Naomi and Hikaru and all that stuff, which are the more advanced 3D boards. So Sega Saturn was the best of Model 1, 2, and 3 3D hardware, the 3D arcade ports that they did, along with Capcom's sort of 3D stuff as well, because Capcom were on board with Sega this time around. Because if you remember the previous generation, Capcom had pretty much decided to side with the Nintendo hardware, and there were like a few like Capcom games on the Mega Drive, and that's it. But this time, Capcom left pretty much. They didn't abandon Nintendo. There's still some Capcom games on the N64, but predominantly some really good arcade ports made it to the Sega Saturn with that. So yes, it is predominantly. I would say the Saturn's main niche was had some really good games. If you love the arcade style games, the Saturn was the console out for you. It did it
It's
better than the rest.
it's a very important question in my opinion, because of the fact that during that era, it was a race to emulate the arcade experience, for home consoles. Like, it was a big thing for you to be able to say, my console can handle arcade level graphics, or can I play this arcade game at home?
But then
So. Mhm.
it's not so much arcade level graphics; it's contemporary arcade level
Mhm.
graphics. Well, so
Yes.
one thing that the Saturn did, and up until that 16-bit era, we all knew the Neo Geo AES could literally do one-to-one arcade ports. That was the only system they created, but it was just ridiculously expensive for what it was.
Mhm.
And we know why. But with the Sega Saturn, that one made it probably more affordable for people because the game media was on disc. It wasn't on expensive cartridges like the Neo Geo. So buying the games for Saturn then was affordable. So you could
Mhm.
play these games that were nearly just as more or less near enough one-to-one. Not
Mhm.
are we talking like I have Sega Ages Volume 1. So not only are we talking about the games before the 16-bit era, because one thing the Mega Drive attempted and did a good job with System 16 stuff.
Mhm.
It wasn't a true scale. Like, for example, Outrun was their own. It wasn't a port. It was something they made for the Mega Drive. You know,
Mhm.
a lot of these sort of arcade things were their versions of it. It wasn't exactly an arcade port. Whereas they ported the arcade games on Saturn. Saturn could handle all that System 16 stuff that we saw behind. It could handle System 32 stuff, and it could handle obviously the first Model 1 games and going forward. So it actually made the architecture to not only cater for games of the past that weren't capable for their older system,
Mhm.
but the system contemporary at the time. Virtua Fighter could be made on that. Virtua Cop could be put onto that. House of the Dead could be put onto
Mhm.
that. And it was literally okay. Arcade will always be better, but it was a faithful port. It was something that you could enjoy, and it brought the arcade home. That's something Saturn could do, which Mega I wouldn't say couldn't, did a better job than what Mega Drive attempted. And that's what
Agreed. Yeah.
Mega Drive always was. Even with this whole Mark 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they're trying to bring the arcade home. And the arcade experience they was successful with Mega Drive. It wasn't. Those of us arcade fanatics know that it's not exactly the same, but it's possible. With Saturn, it made it real. It made it real,
Oh,
and that's what I like.
Joe has a question here. Joe, or has a point. There you go, Joe.
So to those who are listening to the show right now, we are showing some video documentary about the Saturn,
Mm,
and we are seeing a lot of interviews and testimonials
mm,
from video game enthusiasts and journalists back then.
mm,
One excerpt here on the screen says, "Not surprisingly, word got out quickly in the West. The
Mhm.
US and EU consumers immediately started asking the obvious question: why should I buy a 32X when the Saturn is only a few months away?" Says
Very
Scott
pertinent
Well, the
question.
answer to that
Bayless.
question is buy it, and in years from now, it'll be a collector's item. It'll go for a clean transfer.
But we as
But
gamers, when we as gamers buy something gaming related, well, way back when, we really weren't
you would
thinking
think
about
that way.
collector's item. We didn't have the collector's item mentality back then. We just wanted to get the thing that could play the most games best. I guess that was the way that we thought. And
Yeah.
sad to say, 32X really didn't make a very good argument for that one.
No, it didn't. I think that really did damage Sega's branding because Sega was seen as being
Mm.
greedy, and it's not the first time this has happened. And we'll touch on that probably in later videos. But Sega was seen as
Mm.
being greedy. They launched a system that was meant to be a stopgap, and I understand where they were going with this. And the reason the 32X existed was, and I believe this firmly, Hayao Nakayama was intimidated because he knew that he was intimidated by numbers. He saw the Atari
Mm.
Jaguar threat, really Atari a threat, and he saw the Panasonic 3DO as a threat, and he knew
Well,
that he looked at specs thinking that that's the
mm.
way forward. But no, it's about gameplay. Like look at the Super Nintendo. Okay,
Mhm.
Sega Mega Drive could go toe to toe with it, even though it was a 2 year older piece of hardware. And he created the Sega CD, Sega made to compete against that. And if you really, that was enough, to be honest. I think I agree that they had. I mean, you could argue that Sega CD also damaged their brand because
Mhm.
it was expensive for what it
If
was.
if I may interject, if I
Go ahead.
remember it correctly, based on the Console Wars book,
Mhm.
um, so Hayao Nakayama had this inkling inference that okay, with Atari coming out with their disc-based system, the Panasonic
Mhm.
3DO, and
Mm,
then Sony with the PlayStation. And mind you guys, this is just before the release dates. This is just um, hearsay uh, from hearsay from people reached to Hayao Nakayama, thinking that okay, the CD based technology is here, is approaching, and they want to make sure that Sega has a good footprint on the market, not to be left out. Although that being said, they already got the Sega CD, so why should they even be worried about that anyway?
well,
But
the
we're
concern.
talking about the next gen here, so they're
I
thinking Hayao Nakayama, to my recollection, according to the book, he wanted to make sure that the Sega Saturn should be out by the holiday season of 1995-94.
Yeah, it was
Mhm.
94. It
All
was
right,
94.
Hmm.
stop the presses. Stop the presses. Before anything else, let's welcome Dan Faulkner, the other member of the Sega Mega Masters, into the panel. And hey, Dan, it's great to see you. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good to be here. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. Caught up in some
No
heavy
worries.
traffic,
No,
but,
no worries. No
but
worries.
we're on it now.
We're just extremely happy that you're here. And yeah, before anything else though, let's just say hi to everybody in the chats as well. We'd like to say hi to JDM Juan de Marcos, who says, "Hey, a Dan Faulkner appears." There you go. And RV Lagahit Ramos, who says hi and nice. Hello, hello, RV. It's great to see you. Of course, let's not forget Raymond John Orendes, one of our panelists, who probably just got back home from where he just came from, and Eds Reyes, who says fighting games on Saturn are the best. Oh, that's a very bold claim, which I guess Viraj and Dan are
A
gonna have
bold
to say
claim.
whether, yeah, which are,
A
yes, a
bold
very,
claim.
yes,
The truth.
yes,
Needs to be proven.
needs to be proven. There you go. Let's see. Let's also say hi to Jep Sardalia, Tito Popoy, who says evening, gents, and of course, everybody else on the chat. Let's not forget, type in your opinions, how you think things played out. Could Sega have done better? Did they take a few missteps? Please put in whatever reactions you've got in the chats, because we want to hear what you think, not just about what our handsome guests and panelists here are talking about, but also what everybody else is saying in the chats. Just react, comment, say what you feel. We'll do what we can to read out what you guys are saying as well. All right, back to you, Raj or Dan, maybe whatever you guys want to say.
I just want to make my point on in regards to what I think Sega were doing in regards to wanting and having a desire, and feeling intimidated by all these other brands that are bringing out
Mhm.
this. I forgot to mention the Amiga CD32, which was
Oh
absolute
yeah.
crap.
That bullshit? No.
But he saw these other platforms, and there was an influx of all these systems just coming out, which had bigger numbers than what Sega had with their 16-bit hardware.
Mhm.
I'm sure you'd feel intimidated too. And I think, look, I would say the mistake was, and I believe that Sega needed to make the Sega CD because they needed to learn how to program CD. I believe that was the way forward. I mean, I know a lot of people say, well, there wasn't enough for the Sega CD, and I'll touch on that. And I think the reason there wasn't enough software for Sega CD is because, and I blame the 32X for this, there was no need for that. I believe that was something they could have done without. They should have just gone straight from Sega Mega Drive. The Sega CD was their premium option at the time for games with great sound and great scaling. It allowed scaling ability so it could compete with Nintendo and enhance the graphics for the Mega Drive experience. It was the premium Mega Drive experience, Sega CD, but it wasn't fully utilized because Sega were pushing their resources onto 32X. If they had developers still making games for for Sega CD, it would still be decent for what it was. Maybe not a runaway success like the Mega Drive, but it would have been a premium option for Mega Drive consumer, and I think that's what it should have remained as. But I believe that they shouldn't have made the 32X because I think that really did damage their brand. I think they should have just gone straight to Sega Saturn and worked on that. How the Saturn, I believe, in terms of the Sega Saturn, though, I think the failings there was Sega of Japan were resentful of Sega of America, as we know now, because history tells us. They should have worked well together with Tom Kalinske. They could have created a really good solution. They could have pushed this thing out better. It would have been a success in the West, success in the Japan regions, and Sega wouldn't have had to worry so much about what people would think about their brand, and it would be more successful and wouldn't be seen as what it is being seen as now. Now, going forward with the release, another problem was the surprise launch in 1995, which he was ordered to do. Not something that he wanted to do, but he had to do it. And it's embarrassing when you're standing on a podium, and you can see the video on YouTube. It's there where he's saying, "This is the Sega Saturn. This is its abilities." He's really trying to sell this thing, right? You see this guy putting on all the moves, saying, "This is what it will do. This is how it's going to be," and all this stuff. And it's going to be $399, and it's out today, which is suicide. Even he admits to it in interviews now. Out today, and it was brand suicide because only Target and Toys R Us, I believe, were selling it. Everybody else was omitted, I believe. Okay, I think it was Target, but anyway, one of the other retailers as well as Toys R Us got it in America, and nobody was stocking it. And it got to the point where he was getting phone calls from these people saying, "Look, we're not even going to stock your system now." That's how angry he was. Why did they get it and we not get it? And when you find out, and there was a leak recently that came out a few months ago. I don't know if you know about this, Dan. Do you want the markup for retailers for Sega Saturn? Do you want what money they were making, like in terms of percentages? Go on, guess, guys. What was the markup on a Sega Saturn if you're a retailer buying this thing to sell it off Sega?
Normally, a markup would probably be around 10-20%.
Right. The markup was 6%.
That's going to be barely.
What?
Yeah, that's going to be barely anything to break even.
The Sega leaks this year when one of the executives of Sega Japan put it out there, and it was all out there. It was 6% markup on Sega Saturn in America. Anyway, I don't know about Europe, but that's what it looked at. I thought, goodness me, no wonder. Like, there was a number of issues with this thing, not just a high price point and the proposition they were offering, but a 6% market, like 6% markup for retailers to sell this thing. What is this? It's no wonder. So, I mean, okay, so they've alienated other retailers to stock their system, and eventually, sadly, in America, the Sega Saturn became a mail order item. That's how bad it got. No retailers wanted to stock it in the end, so that really hurt the brand in America. In Japan, however, different story. It was tailor-made for their market. It was tailor-made because they knew they did so much research from the failings with Mega Drive and how they created it and what didn't work. They knew what would work. So when they launched it in 1994, and the software on it, they made sure that they got embedded with a lot of developers, Capcom including. We got them in the West. And so many. We had Konami. A lot of them were on board to begin with Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn was a runaway hit in Japan up until 1997, and that's only because Sony at that point had gained traction, and they managed to get Final Fantasy VII on their side. That's the only thing that really pushed the PlayStation products for Japan and made sure that the PlayStation took over as the dominant system in the Japanese market and took that away from Sega. But when you say the Sega Saturn outsold the Nintendo 64 in Japan, you're thinking, what? Really? It's like a different world. What? It was that successful in Japan? But it's true, it did. It was just that good in Japan because it had the RPGs that people wanted. It had the games that Japanese people wanted to play. It had those arcade ports that arcade ports that we wanted You know,
Mhm.
so the Saturn had it for the Japanese gamer, and those of us in the West that prefer those sort of arcade games, like Sedan over here, you know, which none of the others could offer as a proposition. So the Saturn, you know, gets a bad rap because also, as you can see here, this is Sonic Extreme, which you know was a cancelled project for the reason
So
that
slow.
well, cancelled because Yuji Naka said no, he doesn't want it because I think it was to do with hubris in the sense that Sega Japan couldn't make a 3D Sonic game, so they let Sega STI do it, Sega Technical Institute in America, to try and do it. The guy who actually created this demo or this game got pneumonia. He was so sick because he was working so many hours trying to make it, and he was stressed.
Ah.
And he got to the point where Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama went to America to look at this game, and he was angry, and he said, no, forget this. This game's being pulled. It's not good enough. Doesn't pass the quality set. And that's why Sonic Extreme never happened. And I think that's another problem which hurt Sega badly with Saturn in the West, because it didn't have an identity. Their flagship mascot, Sonic, on it. That really hurt it as well. So, you know, that didn't happen really hurt the brand for Sega as well. Like, you wanted to have, like, Mario had Mario 64. Sony had like Crash Bandicoot. Where's our hero Sonic the Hedgehog? Where is the new Sonic Adventure game for Sega Saturn? When are we going to get a 3D Sonic game? And yes, I understand that Yuji Naka himself felt we couldn't make a proper 3D Sonic game. I think that they could have made a good 3D Sonic game, but it just took a lot of work and they needed to spend more money and they didn't want to because they were overstretched as it was. If you think about this time, they were making games for Master System. They're making games for Game Gear, the 8-bit handheld. They're making games for Mega Drive still when it was first being developed, when the Saturn was being released. You know, they're still making games for Sega CD, yeah? And they're also now making games for Saturn as well, and 32X. You've got six formats they're making games for. They're overstretched, and they didn't have the resources as well. So there are just so many things that went wrong. There's so many, and the crazy thing throughout all this is the Saturn still succeeded, at least in the Japanese region. Yeah, at least Sega stayed alive. And people said, "Oh, Saturn was such a flop." The thing is, in the West, it was a flop. In Japan, it was a very big success. And if you actually look at Sega's P&L, even though they were making losses here and there, they're still making money on this thing. In fact, the Japanese sort of executives, they would always have lunches with Sony, like with the Sony people as well. They're like, "Well, hang about, how are you making money on this device? I mean, look, like we're Sony, we make our own optical drives, we make our own processors, we make our own sound chips. You have to go to Hitachi to make processors for this. You've had to go to whoever to make the optical drive for this. You've had to go to Yamaha to get the sound chips in this. You're not making your own stuff. How are you making money on this?" Because it was £100 more for a reason, $100 more, because it had premium components in, and it was an over-engineered mess, really. And it was difficult to make games for a lot of newer programmers. Because 3D, let's not forget, this is the first generation where 3D games are coming to the front. And it was a new frontier for developers to make games for. So the thing that the PlayStation had is they had a dev kit which made it easy for developers to make games for on their system. Whereas this thing, it wasn't as easy because it was over-engineered. So again, we have a console which has a hardware that's overcomplicated. It costs more money. The markup wasn't there for retailers. They didn't market it properly by making good ties with retailers in the West. They were overstretched. There was no communication happening between Sega of America, Sega of Japan. And there are a whole host of errors. It's not just one reason why the Saturn didn't do well. It's a number of reasons. And I think it's just crazy that happened. But in spite of all these problems, the Saturn was still somewhat successful in Japan. So that's my thoughts on the Saturn.
$399 for the Saturn. Whoa.
Yeah, that's $685 in today's money.
$399. Yeah, that honestly
and this is
that,
1995. So how much is that now, inflation wise?
Right, and that's the press conference that Kulinski said that. And then the most annoying thing about that press was, as soon as he got off the stage, okay, guess who comes on the stage afterwards? The Sony guy comes on there, and he goes, "This is our PlayStation. We're going to launch at this time. It's $299," and he just drops the card and walks off the stage.
That's it. That was the entire speech. $100 less. And we're good.
So according to the video, the only retailers that got it was, well, assumingly got it, Toys R Us,
Yeah,
Babbage, and EB Games
EV games.
back in
EB.
1995.
Not Target. So if Target weren't selling this,
Mhm.
God, they're a big deal in America. So the fact that they didn't, it just made me think, good Lord.
Mhm.
And how did Sega even get a footprint there? And it's a shame because they had worked so hard with Mega Drive to get this market share in Europe and America. America it got hit hard first. The Saturn was still a thing here in Europe because Sega's brand, even though it was damaged, people still love Sega here. I think we have more of a love for Sega here in Europe than the Americans do, to be honest. But because I think when people think of Sega in America, they just think of Genesis and that's it, and maybe a touch of Dreamcast. They don't ever talk about Saturn. Apart from Sega Lord X on YouTube, he's the only guy paying for it. But then again, he imported his Saturn from Japan, so he's as far as I'm concerned, he's half Japanese. But for the rest of us, it was a system that we still loved, but it was in third place. It was the third thing that we didn't that was overlooked, and people say, "Oh, the Saturn sucks."
I think I mean I could be completely wrong on this. It could also have been because of the fact that you did mention Viraj the Atari Jaguar looming in the horizon. And Atari, let's not forget, during that time was still a really big name. Atari with the 2600 was the console to get way back in the 70s. So for Atari to have announced that they were coming out with, was it a 64-bit? Their marketing was it that it was going to be
Wasn't
the first
64 bit.
That's
Yeah, I
what
know.
they were gunning for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what they were gunning
64
for.
bit.
It was
But
32 bit. He used the Tom and Jerry chips. One was 32,
yeah,
one was 32.
exactly.
They worked in tandem. They didn't work together. It's a 32-bit machine. All right.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sega got scared by that
They
tagline
did.
because
They did. They were intimidated. Hayao Nakayama himself was worried about numbers, and it wasn't numbers. It's about the software. And look, one thing I'll give credit to Nintendo for, even though they
It's about. Severaj is right on this because let's just so back at what 93, 94. If
around
you're
that
going to
time.
look at the video game, if you're going to look at the gaming pie, for what 48% was Sega with the Genesis, and then right around 40, the 47, no, about 45%
it was
to
actually
Nintendo,
63%.
and
It was 63% Sega.
yeah. So what was the percentage back then? So it was Sega first, and then Nintendo, and then the remaining little bits of pieces in there were the other consoles, yeah. And then by approaching 94, 95, 96,
94,
with all of
95,
these,
they started to change it.
yeah, with all of these, with all these companies coming out with their own systems, yeah, you're right. Hayao Nakayama must have thought, oh shit, we might lose a little bit more edge to
And
these guys.
that share, what he should have done is he should have known that 63% share. And even though that is to do with the leaks as well, and there were some bad deals that Tom Kalinske made just to get the market share with retailers to get Genesis rolling in America. And the deals he made were like going to a shop, like he talked to like the the retailers and say, okay, we'll make a deal. I don't know if he was directly responsible, but the deal, I think he was, we'll sell you, I don't know, 100,000 Mega Drive or Genesis units. And if the ones that you don't sell, we'll buy back. And that was like a really bad.
I would argue that even though Tom Kalinske did a great because Tom Kalinske did a great contribution to that percentage.
Yeah.
For some reason, I felt like Hayao Nakayama didn't trust Tom Kalinske good enough. Just let Sega of America do the marketing on this.
This is it. I mean,
They did the work. They did the work for Sega.
This is it.
On to get that to get that percentage, to get that high numbers.
That's correct.
So right. So why are you even alienating the guy? And if I remember correctly, Tom Collins said, "Let me do things my way. If I fail, let me fail." If I he said that. So and then Hayao Nakayama basically reneged that verbal agreement that they had.
Yeah.
He had to impose his will, saying that no, you're going to release the Saturn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think but then on the flip side, I mean, even Tom Kalinske said famously in an interview recently, he didn't like the Saturn. We didn't like it. He even said it. This recently, because I didn't like the way it played. I didn't like some of the games on it. I didn't like the Sonic. I think I've never liked Sonic since the Mega Drive. That's him. Like, even on the Dreamcast, he talked about famously. I don't think they've ever managed to master Sonic in 3D and all these other things he said. But then it could be arguing he's just getting high on his own supply because he made Sega a success when he was in charge, and that's why he put it out there. But then, at what cost did he make them a success? It was found later on that because he discounted the Genesis or the Mega Drive hardware, they were selling some of the units or a proportion of the units at a loss because they had to buy it back, obviously, if it wasn't sold. But because he was so aggressive at making sure that Mega Drives were in all these stores, it was accessible and available to the public at the discounted price, so people could get their Genesis. They had the option to tackle Nintendo. And in all fairness, that strategy works today. In fact, Microsoft and Sony, they sell their systems, and we know that these systems sell at a loss. They're loss leaders. The idea is they make a loss on the systems because it subsidizes it, because they make the money online and on the software. That's where the money's at.
That's very true.
That's exactly what he was thinking. Okay, we'll make a bit of a loss on the system here. We'll make a hell of a lot of money on the software. That's how we get the market share back. Whereas Nintendo traditionally have always focused to make their money on the system. I think the only developer of consoles now that tried to make money on the console as well as the software. That's how they've always worked. Whereas Sega, they had the thinking that was 2 generations ahead of its time, because that's what Sony did with all their systems, which is, well, not with PlayStation, but with PS2 and others, they make a slight bit of a loss, but they know that the software, getting the market share is the key. Because you've got more people with your systems, they're going to buy games for your systems, and that's where we make the money. That's what it's all about. It's
the give the razor away for free, and you can sell the blades for a profit model. You know,
I would like to hear Sir Dan's 2 cents on this.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Talking about the Sega Saturn, its hardware. Your thoughts? Go.
So what would you like to hear specifically, Joe?
Well, I guess it's more a case of how
your personal experiences with the Saturn.
Yeah, and that's it. That would be a good starting point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the Saturn, when that got released, one of my best friends bought it pretty much straight away, because like Viraj has already pointed out, it was really expensive on release. And I was only a teenager at the time, so he got it. He was working. He was about 4 or 5 years older than me. He was working, got it, and he used to work away a lot. So that was really good for me, because every time he used to work away, he were a painter and decorator, and when he used to get contracted away, he used to loan me a Saturn. So I actually never bought one because of that, because I essentially had access to one, pretty much every other week. I were playing it, and I'd still got plenty of Mega Drive games, still got plenty of SNES games, I got a PC at that time, so I've got plenty to be going. So I didn't actually bother buying a Saturn, and I regret not buying one, because I actually got a N64 and the PlayStation, and out of all of them, I preferred the Saturn. I think the Saturn had the most enjoyable games for me. A big part of that was because we had a big gang of friends. We had a gang of like 14 friends, and Saturn just had the best arcade stuff.
What was the game that you were playing on it the most?
Yeah, it blew PlayStation. People wax lyrical about PlayStation, and that's because they sit at home by themselves playing Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, which are fantastic games. That's great. You got a group of mates. You play Street Fighter. I had X-Men versus Street Fighter on PlayStation, and the load times were horrendous, and the game played sluggish, and it looked like shit compared to the Saturn. Saturn version blew it away. And so it were. I regret never having a Saturn, but I still had quite a lot of experience playing it through owning it off my friends. So I think it's a fantastic little system. I think it's a really good little system. It's just a shame everything's so expensive now. And I think Sega. Everybody says Sega did all these things wrong, and I think they did. Don't get me wrong. I think they made a lot of mistakes, but I also think these mistakes were born out of mainly doing what they did before. They were aggressive. They were creative, and that got them to be a market leader. So you can't really fault them for persisting with that approach. It was just very disjointed.
It's the method to their madness. That's what it was. The method.
That's it, mate. The way they went about it were very disjointed, and there were a lot of competitors entering the market, as you all have rightly pointed out. But having said
It
that,
was pointed out before that the executives of Sega of Japan were, for the lack of a better word, were jealous and insecure that the Sega of America is doing well, and this is their company. So how come this white people for the I'm sorry for the language, why these
Racist.
gaijins are doing well and we're
Well, yes,
not.
that is what would happen to Joe. Basically, when Tom Kalinske would have a meeting, and he only found out about this afterwards, is he'd fly back to America, and he found out that Hayao Nakayama, when he got angry, People were scared of this guy, the Sega CEO. He was a bad man. He'd go into the meeting and tear all the Sega of Japan executives. Look, why can't you be selling the Mega Drive? Like, why is the Mega Drive not doing well here? These are Americans, these Westerners. They could do it better than us. What is this? We made this thing. So you can imagine the resentfulness that the Sega of Japan executives would have had against people like Tom Kalinske. Even Tom Kalinske's plan implement for the Genesis in America. He said, well, we're going to make fun of the competition. We're going to put Sonic as a packing game. Okay, when Sonic came out, we're going to lower the price of the Mega Drive. And he said all these things that he wanted to do. And they all objected to him. And Hayao Nakayama was angry because they were objecting to him, but he goes, you know what? I'll let you be president of America so you can take care of all the Western stuff. I'm going to let you do your plan. And he agreed to him. And guess what? It worked. But it's like how that he didn't. It was hurtful because he made it successful. He made successful Sega's brand expand in the West. He made it expand as big as it was. People knew about Sonic the Hedgehog because it was like a packing game on the Mega Drive, and it's a great game for what it is. I don't care what anyone says. I love the first Sonic game, and it worked well, and it was a great packing. It was genius what he did. But it's upsetting that Sega of Japan didn't take on board that these guys can make their product better, and they didn't want to take advice. They were arrogant. They were upset. This is the way things were going to go, and they didn't want to lose their power. They felt
Pettiness, yes, petty. They were quite petty.
They got arrogant to the point where was it arrogance or was it self-pride? So I mentioned how
pettiness, childish pettiness.
I mentioned how the Silicon Graphics deal fell through because Sega Japan said no, we don't want that. But Silicon Graphics, do you know who got it in the end? Nintendo with their Nintendo 64. They worked with Nintendo 64 to work with the graphics for that system. So even that was over-engineered for what that was. But then going forward as well, again. Sony actually came to Sega saying, look, we've got this thing called a PlayStation. We can make a Sega PlayStation. And Sega goes, what are you talking about? You just make TVs, man. What do you know about making software? So they told them to get lost. So Sega had
Tom Kalinske was very interested.
Yeah.
Went to Hayao Nakayama. He said, what Sony knows about video games? They make Walkmans. They make radios. What do they know about making video games? No.
I want to quickly answer a question because JDM just put it here. So for Viraj and Serdan, did you guys get your Saturn on its release a year late or a year later? I didn't get a Saturn on release. My dad got me a PlayStation 1 for Christmas 1997. So even when the 5th generation came out, okay, even though it was 1995, all this stuff, it only really, for me and for what I believe, it took off in 1997 for me when I got a PlayStation. I think it was a very expensive proposition, 95, 96. For a kid, I was only, 11 years old, I didn't work. My father bought me my stuff. So he got me a PlayStation 1, which in hindsight was actually the right console to buy for that generation, to be honest. Yes, it couldn't do everything the Saturn could do. But in all fairness, I was too young for a lot of the Saturn games at the time, if I'm being honest. I wasn't a teenager. I think those games were made for a teenager. I was a kid. I wanted to play Spyro the Dragon. Okay?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a great point. I think Sega's philosophy was to target an adult audience.
Yeah,
and at the time, there were a lot of, like I say, a lot of kids had just really got into game. I mean, like I say, you look at Spyro on PlayStation, and that sold.
Yeah,
God knows how many PlayStations. You know what I mean? Because it were PlayStation.
Spyro, Crash.
Yeah.
So to answer Jaden's questions, I picked this up. All right, boxed and complete with about 20 games. All these games. I'm going to show you the games as well. £50 in 2008 for £50. Boxed and complete with the controller. and I got 20 games with it, including.
£50, not so bad.
I'll show you the games, right? And I got
Box with games.
That
Not
was
so
in
bad.
that was in 2008 before the retro game market completely exploded.
Yeah,
Really.
exploded. I bought it before
Yeah.
it exploded. I'm keeping this. I'm actually looking to mod this at some point because it's like I said, buying Saturn games is a king's ransom now. So I'm thinking of doing a mod on this, and we can talk about what mod I want to do on it later. But we can touch on the Saturn games because we've come up to the hour mark now. So I'm wondering, unless there's anything else we want to discuss in regards to the
Well,
hard.
if I can interject, in my case, I think I speak for the Filipino populace here when I say the Sega Saturn came and went without really all that much fanfare or glory in Philippine shores. Sad to say, I'm honestly sad that it actually happened that way. To provide a little bit of context, during that time, it was after the Sega Genesis, and people were kind of waiting around for the next big thing. The Sega 32 came and went. Sega Saturn came and went. It was during that era when people in the Philippines, I think people like Jake Belmont in chats can attest to this right now. He says in Tondo, Manila before Sony PlayStation is number one. That era around 1993, 4, 5, around that time, that was when PlayStation. I could be wrong on my timeline here because I was in college. I was really heavily invested in trying to pass my accounting subjects back then. Um, that was when the PlayStation really hit the Philippine shores big. There's one place in the Philippines which was the technological hub of Metro Manila back then. It was called Green Hills, and when you went over there, there were rental stations which kind of gauged what consoles were big. But before Super Nintendo and Genesis were like left and right. Before long, it was PlayStation 1. There was one Sega Saturn there that I never got the chance to play. It was just there sitting, and I didn't know what it was until people kind of said, hey, that's the successor to the Sega Genesis. And really, people kind of, oh, Ed's Reyes said Rasheer Green Hills. Oh, that was a great place to get software. Ed's great memory right there. But yeah, it was, I call it the era when PlayStation really went into dominance in Metro Manila, in the Philippines, everywhere. And I'm sad to say that that was really when also people had very little money to spend. That was when people had to make one choice as to what console they had to buy. So it was when Sega Saturn came out, we'd heard about it. It was really expensive. And the Sony PlayStation came out. It was cheap, and sorry to say, it was very moddable. A lot of people actually could mod their PlayStation 1 to play. All right, we're not endorsing this, ladies and gentlemen. Bootleg
Oh,
games.
is that the word that we're using right now? Mod?
Yeah, well, you could mod it
Mod?
so that you could play
Ironically, it's called
unoriginal
Green Hill.
games. I'd like to hear Dan's take on this too. Dan.
No, I was just about to say that was the main reason why, as a 13-year-old kid who only had a paper round, I got the PlayStation because it was piratable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a better machine. I mean, I've just noticed in the comments a lad called Jake Ballman has said when it comes to hardware, Sony PlayStation has better graphics. If you remember, guys, Symphony of the Night on Saturn, the graphics sucked. Now, I agree with that. That was a poor port in terms graphically.
It was a bigger game. It was a bigger game.
It was a bigger game. It had 18 extra enemies.
Maria.
It had extra areas. It had extra bosses. So for the connoisseur gamer, for the proper gamer, not the casual, and that's the difference here. PlayStation, Nintendo were more a casual gamers machine.
Yes.
Sega were more a hardcore gamers machine, and that had always been Sega's philosophy. You didn't, you look at one of the best genres on the Saturn and the Mega Drive, and it's the shoot 'em ups. And very few casual gamers play shoot 'em ups just because they're not really good enough to. Without being horrible, the struggle to play. The reflexes aren't as good, and they're not into that style of game. They prefer platformers or RPGs and stuff that is easier. Whereas they loaded the Saturn with some fantastic shoot 'em ups like Radiant, Silver Gun, and Battle Gregor. The PlayStation had that too, but like you say, it basically feeds into that what you're saying there, Sir Joel. That old philosophy of one's a casual machine, one's an hardcore gamer's machine, and your casual machine got modded and it got it were easy for the majority to access.
And the philosophy carries over all the way to today. Some people say Sony's winning the battle. Some people say Microsoft is winning the battle. Honestly, it's still the mobile gamers who are winning the battle, because if you check out the revenues, mobile gamers, being for casual gamers, are making the most money in terms of gaming nowadays. So it was one of those
There'd be a
things.
huge market for it because no one can afford all these home consoles. They just play games on their mobile phones. That's their console.
Precisely. Yeah.
But it is what I always find is this is not just Saturn related. This is one of the weirdest things in gaming now, and culture, which I honest to God, I find it so strange, is that people give a shit about sales figures. Because when I look at my favorite bands, my favorite films, my favorite games, they're not popular. They're not super popular. The Last Jedi is shit, and it's
oh my gosh! Don't even make me remember that thing.
exactly. But it sold so much. It made so much more money than the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
When people are coming out with these things saying sales figures and all that, I mean, it's good for our debate and that, but it definitely doesn't define quality.
Yes, precisely.
That's the old saying: "Nothing succeeds like shit." But anyway,
I mean, everybody does it.
I think it's ironic how you call that place Green Hills, which is a Sega.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
It was like the Mecca, the technological Mecca of the Philippines way back when, and I don't even know if it's still the same situation right now. But I'm sure there's also places in the UK and here in the US that are the equivalent, where that's the place to go when you're looking for tech. So. I mean, anyway, continue.
Have a look at the controller, shall we? This is the Model 1. So obviously I've got the Model 1 launch Saturn here. I've got, obviously it's the launch Saturn I've got. This is the controller.
Yes. It actually looks a lot like the Sega Genesis controller.
It's similar, but the Model 2 of this is the better controller. I don't have it to hand. I'm sure everyone's seen it because that's the one that people go to now.
It's lovely, the Model 2. It is a delicious controller.
I think this aesthetically is really interesting because they try to go futuristic with the design of it. Nice little flat bits to hold it. You got a nice D-pad on this, which I like. I like the D-pad. The buttons are good. You got clicky bits here, clicky LNR buttons. I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's what I like about the Model 2. They're not so clicky, and then they're a lot more expensive. But they're much more comfortable to hold. This is obviously for if you've got big hands, this is really good. But they do dig into your palms a bit with the square bits if you play for long periods of time. So that's one controller I've got. The other controller that I had for it, this is obviously the one that came with it. Oh, I just put it here. Let's not break anything. This is the 3D controller that came with my nice. Okay, so let's have a look at this lovely little.
That one is the one that controller is pretty iconic. For those of you in the audio chat, Viraj is now showing the circular controller of the Sega Saturn. It's I have to admit that one is very eye-catching. You kind of wonder in the back of your head, how the heck are you supposed to hold that thing? It's very round.
You hold it like this, so you can see it was a step before. With the Dreamcast controller, you can sort of see it's a step before that, and they obviously scaled it down a bit for Dreamcast. You can see that they were going that direction. I love this controller, and one thing I really am sad about is I think it's the last proper Sega controller which had that 6-button layout. I love that 6-button layout, and it was a bit of a cop-out. One thing I don't like about Dreamcast is that 4-button, that they went uniform with that 4-button SNES or PlayStation side. One thing I love about Sega was this 6-button arcade style. I think that should have been the medium, and that's why.
JDM in Twitch says, ironically, it looks like a Sony Discman.
I read that on the forum. It looks like a Sony Discman with the buttons. But you got this lovely little analog stick. It's beautiful, and it came packed with Nights into Dreams, or you could buy it separate or whatever. It's nice, and you got this little button here, which is the start button, and you got this switch here. What does that switch do? People might have asked in forums. I'll tell you what it does. It allows you to switch between using the D-pad or the stick. So it switches these two around. Or a digital input. That's basically what they say.
Okay.
And if you look closely, I think you can see. I don't know if it's light. You can see the icons either side with the O and the I, analog or digital. I think that's what they're trying to get. So you have that.
I've got to say, I've got no idea, absolutely no idea why that 4-button setup became so popular, because you can do. I've not got a Saturn one, but you can do exactly the same thing. It is literally just hold that down and use that. You take them off. You've got your 4 buttons there in the same shape. So why
Yeah.
not just add them? It's the most mind-boggling thing. Mind-boggling.
It's A, B, X, and Y. It's the same bloody Nintendo button.
Same setup, and
I've got little triggers here. What I like using this controller, even for not just for 3D. When I'm playing Outrun on my Sega Ages Volume 1, this is acceleration, this is brake, and this is to control the vehicle. This is it. And if I want to change the gear, I can make one of the buttons, and it's really good because you can configure it to whatever way you want. So you can have acceleration, brake, or whatever, and you do this, or you can have gear up, gear down, or whatever. So you can do what you want. It's really, really good intuitive control. So I will say, look, I know some people have their thoughts. This is a really comfortable, cool controller to use. I think it's like that. In my opinion, because Dreamcast controllers, there are people who love it. It's all right, but this is in my opinion, like the pinnacle of Sega controller design. I love this design of the controller.
Eds has a point here. It's hard to emulate Saturn on PC. If you have an old system, you need a high-end PC.
Yeah.
It's still the case actually, because of the fact that emulation, I think you need at least about 3 or 4 times the power of the original console for you to be able to emulate it properly. And it's one of the things that people are still working on nowadays, although they have gotten other systems like Dreamcast working properly nowadays, which is I guess it's a question of which system they prioritize when it comes to figuring out emulation for. Jake Belmont also says that controller is expensive in other countries. I think he was referring to the circular one.
You're lucky to get it for £50, and that's expensive.
Reminds me actually of the Duke controller for the original Xbox, that large one. You know?
This is obviously, and this is the other controller. This is obviously when I want to shoot some pigeons. No, when I want to shoot, I played Virtua Cop 2 with this. And one of the things you're going to laugh at this. So when I bought my home and I got it, I asked my brother, can I have a CRT TV? Because he doesn't use it anymore. I'm taking a Sony TV. And I took it. And the reason I took it is because that's the only way you can play light gun games now with that software. So I basically, the only reason I have a Saturn set up now, or one of the few reasons, is so I can play Virtua Cop 2. And I've got my gun. And Boom Boom or Virtua Cop or whatever it is I'm playing. And it's so much fun. It is so much fun. I've got 2 of these now. So I can play 2-player, and it's a really good just to have that arcade feel at home. I was actually looking at House of Dead on eBay recently, and it was like at £100, and I thought, can I justify buying this game? They're quite rare, actually, those copies. I should have. Part of me thinks I should have and I shouldn't have, but now I'm thinking, now you can mod a Saturn. I can mod it to have that game on thing, and I can do it, and it will cost me half as much now to get a Terror on it. I can do it that way. So if I really want, and because I've also got the House of the Dead remake on Switch, I'm like, do I really want to play the original now? So there's stuff like that. So
am I remembering incorrectly that I saw? I mean, we're getting into high seas territory here right now, but I saw a cartridge, an all-in-one cartridge for Sega Saturn being sold. Is that something that will help owners of the Sega Saturn?
Yeah, so you can get what's called. I don't know if it's called. It's kind of like an EverDrive cart, but you can get like. Well, one thing's a satiator. So one of the things. So here we go. We're going to high seas territory. I'll be very quick with this. You have hack where you can get something called a satiator. That's expensive. It's like £200 just for the hack.
Okay.
And it slides in here, and you get a 400 gig SD card. Put all the ROMs on that. Shove it in there. It'll use the Saturn BIOS. It's proper FGBA. So you have to use an original hardware. It's not emulation, and you're playing the games that way. And it tucks away in here, and you find. And that's a really good way to make it. It's an easy mod. No soldering iron required, and you're done. The only downside of that mod is you can't play multi-disc games. Okay, that's why some people, what they do is they remove their optical drives, and what they do is they actually have an SD card in there, and that bypasses the system, and they use what's called a Terror Onion mod, and that can play multi-disc games. The only problem is you'll never be able to play disc games again. But then some people just don't care because these games go for a lot of money, and I can get my money back for these games that I have, which I paid a peanuts for, £50 in 20 of these games, and we'll go through my library actually, and I could do that. That's what I'm thinking. But should we go through my Saturn library now? Should we do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But before that, let's just say hi to Marlon Hurtado Eliscupides in the chat, who says in Japanese commercials of Sega Saturn, Hiroshi Fujioka, also known as Takeshi Hongo of Kamen Rider Black, but he corrected himself later on. Kamen Rider 1 was the endorser of Sega Saturn as Segata Sanshiro. There you go. Sega! Sega des!
I'll tell you what, that's one. I think that those adverts came quite late in the Saturn's lifeline in Japan. Because remember, it was launched in '94 or whatever. But those adverts started in '97 when Sonic R was coming out to the system, and he promoted it. And there were a number of them, and there were parodies. And I thought, this is genius marketing. Why didn't we have anything like that for us
I
in
mean,
the West?
I'm also kind of remembering. I mean, I could be misremembering this, but I saw an anime recently titled Uncle from Another World, and Sega, as particularly the Saturn, was featured very prominently in some of the episodes there. Joe could correct me on this one, but yeah, it's a testament to how much of an impact the Sega Saturn had in the Japanese market that it's still fondly remembered in a modern anime now called Uncle from Another World. If you guys want, you can check that one out too. Anyway, continue, Viraj.
Right, so let's have a look at my games.
Go ahead.
Let's start with the fighting games. I don't have as many. Like I know there's obviously the Capcom ones. I ain't got any of the Capcom ones, like the Street Fighter Alpha stuff and whatever. And just to touch on that, because someone did say Saturn had the best fighting games.
Oh, Ed's. Sorry, Viraj. Let me interrupt you for a moment here. Ed's Reyes in the chat says, "Do pseudo Saturn mods, Sir Viraj." I don't know what that is. I mean, Viraj might know a little bit more about that one.
So I think there are 3 mods you can do in the Saturn. So I talked about the Satiator, I talked about the Terra Onion. It's a pseudo Saturn mod I'm not really too familiar with. That's the other one. I'll have to look into it. I mean, for me, it's about what's the best thing that's going to... I mean, if it's just a bit more expensive, because right now the Terra Onion mod looks like the best one for me in terms of the way that it lays itself out. In terms of you can see all the games with the boxes, and you can do things like that with the GUI. So it's actually a nice presented Saturn mod. But I'll have to look into that in more detail. But I know Sir Joe's... I think, Sir Joe, you did the Satiator, didn't you, Sir Joe? So how are you finding that mod?
To answer Sir Ed's question first, for all of you guys who cannot really afford the Terra Onion and the Pseudo Saturn, Terra Onion, the Rhea, the Fenrir, and the Satiator, for all of you guys who cannot really afford those, the cheapest alternative out there is using this cart called the Pseudo Saturn, which you just put it inside the cartridge slot, and that will fool the hardware in thinking that what you're playing, the disc wise anyway, is actually legit. Basically, it will allow you to play burned CD games on it. So at least you're still using the optical drive. So you need the optical drive working for this to work. However, at least you don't have to shell out tons of dollars or pounds just buying all of these games. You can just download. Oh, I'm sorry. You can just rip the game. You can just rip the game from the CD, burn it, make a backup copy of it, play it on the Saturn using a pseudo Saturn cart. Oh, and the pseudo Saturn cart, not only that it will play any region backup copies of your Saturn games, it will also give you an additional 500 megabit of RAM and a pre-installed Game Shark as well.
That's for people who can't beat games on their own. But going forward, I'm looking at the fact that okay, you could do this, but then you say it's the cheapest way. Okay, but it basically, I still need to get a CD burner, which I don't have, so I have to put money into that. Then it's the hassle of downloading the ROM, waiting for it to burn onto disk, and I'm impatient. And then I have to take that disk, and I have to. Oh yeah, let's forget. I have to buy some discs as well for it to be burnt on, and then I put it in the Saturn to play it. It's a chore.
And you have to admit, I mean, say who has Sega's CD burners nowadays? I mean, people. My latest laptop doesn't even have a CD drive anymore.
To all of you, ladies and gentlemen over there, my apologies to my high-end, wealthy colleagues here. But us living in the ghetto, we still use CDs. Okay.
He's had a bit of domestic with his wife.
Fine.
Us in the ghetto, we still use CDs. Admit it.
Listen. This is what you get for dressing up as a woman. Your wife kicks you out. Yeah. That's what this is. All right.
Anyway. You guys can check out the previous episode of the Timeless Gamer Show for that one. Okay.
But moving forward, one thing I like about the Terra Onion hack, though, very quickly, is the fact that once you've done it, You don't have to do anything. It's all in there. I don't have to go through that hassle of opening up my drive, putting a disc in there, taking it out. It's all there. I can use the GUI, and I like that aspect of it. It's a bit more money, but I think it's worth it. If you're going to do it once, get it done properly. But I understand people have their own economic bubbles of what they can afford and whatever. Find the best solution that works for you. That's what I would say.
Yes.
Okay, but at the same time, I'm not. On one hand, I don't like promoting this sort of thing, but Saturn collecting is expensive. Yeah, buying games for Saturn is expensive, and you have to be wealthy. So just do what you have to do. That's all. I'm just going to leave it ambiguous. That's it.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest. It's only really pirating games or ripping games off if they're readily and freely available to buy still.
I mean, in all fairness, like if I'm going to buy a Saturn game, it's not going to the pockets of Sega, is it? It's going to the pockets of
Exactly. So it's not. Now, if Sega's got a store or whatever developers made those game or publishers got a store where you can buy it, fair enough. If you can't, emulate it.
It's abandonware, really, if you look at it that way. Semi-abandonware. So, and Sega haven't re-released these games. They haven't made an effort, and I think Sega should. Some of them, yes, okay. But anyway, so before I go to the fighting games, I want to point this thing out. As I said, I'd elaborate a bit more on this RAM slot here. Now, Sedan knows this. There are a number of fighting games, the Capcom games in particular. I can't remember their names of the title from my head. Is it Street Fighter Alpha 3 or something?
Yeah, Alpha 3, X-Men versus Street Fighter.
Where you put the disc in and you can play the games, but you wouldn't get all these sort of extra features like the animated backgrounds that you would in the arcade port. The PlayStation version couldn't do that either. But with the RAM cart, though, what you do is you put that in there and you'd have all the extra features of that fighting game that the arcade version would have, and it would be the best version of that game for the home. Basically, this is Sega pushing their hardware to the limit, saying, we can actually bring the arcade home. So the idea is with games like Street Fighter Alpha 3, I think X-Men versus Street Fighter was another one. You get the RAM cart here with 2 megabytes of RAM, and that would help supplement the game and give you the best experience. So when somebody said it had the best fighting games, they were right. So
I say I totally agree with that. I'm just going to say that were people won't get, if you didn't live through that time, how massive that was. That was like having the best versions of Street Fighter were absolutely humongous, because you wanted to you wanted to go into arcades and beat people in arcades and chat, and have a closest replica to that as them. And then when you brought people back to your house, or back to like say Phil, you go back to Phil's house, having that there in the front room was just a huge deal.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. But let's do this. So my first game I'm going to pull out is called Fighting Vipers. That's a AM2 Sega.
There you go. Fighting Vipers.
Is it rare? I don't know, but it's there. It was given to me as a gift. I don't really care for it.
It is, yes, it is.
It's a nice game. And I've got three. I've got 3 copies. I don't know how I've got 3 copies of Virtua Fighter 2, but I do. Okay, I don't know where they came from. I think one was gifted to me. One came with a deal that I had to get. And anyway, this is it. So Virtua Fighter 2.
They had happy times in one night, and another one popped up. Anyway,
maybe I should give a giveaway.
Are there any naked women in there?
with quadrilateral boobs, yeah. Anyway, yes, if you want to call it that. But no, you have Virtua Fighter 2, which was actually one of the biggest games on the system. To be honest, that's probably why I got so many copies of it. It was a big game when it came out, and I think Tekken obviously was the PlayStation alternative, which is also another really good game as well. And I think whatever you think is better is purely subjective, to be honest, because they're both very, very good games.
For me, the big shame that with Virtua Fighter that didn't stick around is that, like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, Tekken and Virtua Fighter had different approaches to 3D fighting. Virtua Fighter is very much more of a thinking man's fighting game.
It's a technical fighting game.
Exactly. So they both had the place, really, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame that Virtua Fighter that we ain't got more of that. Because
Virtua Fighter 3 and Evo were very good. 4 Evo was very good. 5 and even some of the later ones, 6, they're actually very, very good games. The problem is that they started a bit with 3 and 4. 4 was actually really good, but I don't think they marketed it as well as a proposition as something like Tekken. I think Tekken ran away with it. So Tekken was big in the arcades as well. I remember going to the Trocadero in London.
Yeah.
Everybody queuing up to play Tekken was Virtua Fighter. Where was it? I didn't see it there. I didn't see a Virtua Fighter machine. So maybe the people just jumped on the Tekken bandwagon, and I think that was it, really, sadly. But yeah, that became, well, Virtua Fighter is Sega's last premium fighting series, sadly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what it is. Let's have a look at the action game. So this is Nights into Dreams, which I've spoken about.
One of Raj's most favorite games of
Nights.
all
I
time.
love the music. I love the music. And it's really good with that 3D controller. And this is Christmas night.
Christmas nights.
I've got this. It's the thing. I come with an envelope. I just managed to get this. So yeah, I've got the game. I'm very proud of that. That I've got this because I got these two together, and this one's not so easy to get. So I got that. I got Panzer Dragon. Panzer Dragon. Okay.
First one.
I think you can get it for like 50 quid now. I think I paid like 30 back in the day. Not even, no, I paid like £12 back in the day. I think it's a 50 now. So this has gone up quite a bit. I said back in the day, but it's only just a little over 10 years ago. So there's that. And I even got its sequel, Panzer 2.
Panzer Dragoon 2. Zwei.
Bit as well, because again, I paid a bit more for this than that one. But yeah, it's a big game. Game.
Definitely better, the sequel. Definitely. It's a good game.
They did a Switch port of this.
It's really good.
It's actually good, the Switch port. My main criticism with the Switch port is the play area seems a bit smaller than this one. Even though the graphics are better, the play is a bit smaller. So you win something, you lose something. But that small criticism I have does not mean it's a really good game, the Switch port. So
I've got it on PlayStation, on PlayStation 4, and I think it's a real, I'd say it's a really worthwhile remaster, and I think it's something that everyone should check out.
All right. Question for somebody who's unfamiliar: did you have to have played Panzer Dragoon 1 for you to be able to get into Panzer Dragoon 2, or is it standalone? Okay.
No, standalone. Okay.
Okay.
Sega Ages.
Yes.
This is my most recent title because I wanted to experience the arcade home. And
it has Dan's one of Dan's most favorite video games of all time, Afterburner 2.
All of it, actually. Afterburner, Space Harrier, and Outrun.
That's true.
All of it.
True. Yeah.
3 very special games to me. Then
£30. That's what I paid for this. And £10 for the arcade ports on my Sega Saturn. It's worth it. These are timeless games. You can play them again and again. Obviously, you saw me pull out my Saturn. That's the disc that's still inside. So I really do love it. Obviously, oh no, it's not inside. This is how bad I am, right? Look, I've got Virtua Cop 2 in it. This is heresy I've committed. I've got to do this.
Yes, it's time to fire up that steak and start burning Virage. Okay.
These are really good, faithful arcade ports that are around 60 frames a second. That's all I'll say that. That's
really? Oh.
Yeah, they're 60 frames per second. They've ported it because Space Harrier 2. So Space Harrier Afterburner 2 ran at and Outrun ran at 60 FPS famously.
Okay.
And the 32X port Space Harrier is at 30 frames a second, but they actually did a good job with with both of these. They did a really good port with both of these two games. But the funny thing is, I remember Dan saying that he loves the Mega Drive Afterburner. Yeah. That's his favorite version because there's no smoke trails that blocks from what you can see. So there you go.
You see, it's for me, it's like if you bring it down to gameplay, I always return to the Mega Drive version or Afterburner because they tweak the gameplay to make it a little bit more tighter and accessible. But the port of Outrun on the Sega Saturn is it's just so beautiful. It was one of them that I remember that. You know, bearing in mind, we're Outrun at 85 or 86 the arcade. 86. So bearing in mind, I mean, it's about 10-ish years later that it come out on Sega Saturn, and to finally get that at home in that quality were just super. I mean, we were playing Daytona and Sega Rally, but we always kept going back to Outrun because it's just so accessible and so brilliant.
So speaking of Daytona, here we go. We've got our racing games now. Daytona USA.
There you go.
What I love about this is you got that guy, I forget his name, the Sega legend who does the music. He sings Daytona, and you get to hear him sing when you get the intro. It's actually not a bad game. It's actually really good. However, if you're going to play Daytona on Sega Saturn, I'd strongly recommend Championship Edition. That's the circuit. This is the best one in terms of a game. So if you're going to get a Daytona game, obviously if you like to play, you've got both. this is probably the better game in my opinion. I happen to have 2 copies of these for some weird reason. I don't know why. I think it was gifted to me again by someone. Destruction Derby here by Psygnosis, which is now owned by Sony. This is weird, but Psygnosis is now Sony product, so you got that there. You also have Hardcore 4x4, which is like monster truck racing. This is it. It's a PlayStation game. They play just on Saturn as it does on PlayStation. I think one of the biggest misconceptions has really bad graphics or whatever. It didn't do with programming the game. These Saturn versions of it that are better than the PlayStation ports. So I wouldn't knock it. Got Manx TT bike. Okay, so you got that if you like your bike racing games, and this actually plays really well. I got 2 of these for some weird reason. I don't know why I've got doubles. Sega Rally. This is a great game. They smashed it with this game. AM3 very putting this thing on their thing, and it's like probably one of the top 10 games on Sega Saturn in my opinion. Pretty why I have 2 copies of it because I just love it so much. I have so many doubles, it's ridiculous. Now this game, this is a controversial entry. Sonic R. All right, now I like this game. I don't love it, but I like it because it's interesting. It was meant to be a racing game. They used the engine for that racing game and just put Sonic characters around it. But I think there's just something really cool and novel about it. It's not a great game. It shows that Sonic can work in 3D. Because if you argue, this is actually the first Sonic 3D game. The system didn't have a 3D game. But I like the way it plays. It's not the longest game in the world. It's quite an easy game to complete. It's nice to unlock all the other characters and obviously Metal Sonic and the mecha version of Tails and Knuckles. It's a lot of fun, but it's not a great game. But I think it's a really good game just to have a look at it because it's nice to see what Sega are doing. And really, the soundtrack is the thing that stands out the most about this game. It actually has a lyrical soundtrack. And it's the music in this is beautiful. It's proper Euro Club 1997 style, optimistic, upbeat music. And when I hear this woman singing, I thought it was black vocals. I was shocked to hear it was a white woman singing. I was like, what is a white woman? I looked it up. I thought, what? Listen to Sonic, listen to her sing away Supersonic Racing and all the lovely little songs in there. So that's pretty cool. And my last racing game, which was gifted to me, was Virtual Racing.
Virtual Racing.
See, and this one Virtual Racing gets overlooked, but bloody hell, it's so playable. It is so playable. I mean,
let's be mindful. This is not the same as the arcade version, right? But the 32X version is better because it is an arcade. They actually outsourced this version to another company, which made it different in how it's. If you look at the back of it, it's different in how it plays and how it is. It's not as good. It's not a bad game. But it's not as good as the original arcade one. So don't get confused. Virtual Racing on Sega Saturn is not the arcade version. It's actually a different port. A different studio made it, and Sega just published it. Warner Interactive made this game actually. So that's something that you should be. It's not. If you're going to play Virtua Racing on a home console for that era,
I've noticed one thing about your collection, Viraj, and I'm not sure if it's representative of a lot of the Sega Saturn games, but they're very much action oriented. They're very much emphasizing quick reflexes.
So let me be clear: RPG, the genre for Western audience, hadn't really. It took off with. Let's be honest here. RPG exploded in the West because of Final Fantasy VII. Mainstream. Yeah. Mainstream. It was Final Fantasy VII which did it. I remember people in school going, "Oh, Final Fantasy VII, it's such a good game." I'm like, "What are you talking about, man? Final Fantasy VII? If it's such a big deal, why don't I hear about Final Fantasy 3 or 2 or 4? What about these other games? I never heard of it. What are you talking about?" I mean, I understood that Final Fantasy VII was just the 7th of that series of games, but it hadn't. I believe because I didn't know anyone talk about RPGs until Final Fantasy VII in school. Okay, I didn't know what an RPG was. What is it? A rocket propelled grenade? What are you talking about? It's an RPG role playing game. So it took until like 98 when really 98, 99 people still talk about Final Fantasy VII. It drove me nuts. So I bought the game and I played it. I thought, okay, wonderful. It's got a lovely story. It's a good game. But in Japan, that's what the RPG library is. I'm counting on Sir Joe to talk to me about that.
Okay, yeah. Now this would be Joe's domain then. Yeah. There you go.
This game,
Alien Trilogy.
I love this game. Okay, I think it plays really good. I believe it was also on PlayStation. I don't know if that version plays any good, but I really love playing this one. This is really good. I spent hours playing this. It's got 2-star graphics, if we're being honest, but slightly improved. More. I don't know if my camera's having a bit of glare on it, but that's the sort of cracking graphics you got. but it's there. It's there. It's actually a good alien game, I will say. It's a platformer over the system, and this is because I'm a Sonic fan. I had to have this, and this has a different soundtrack to the Mega Drive game. It wasn't, and it was made by Richard Jacks, who did the soundtrack. And the soundtrack on this is superior to the Mega Drive version, in my opinion. I love the different renditions it has, and it has some extra animation in what it had. But what I will say is, it's a shame that Sega they were pressured to put this out because they didn't have a Sonic game on it, and they just put this one out. And it's a shame they didn't have a 3D Sonic game. I think that's one of the biggest problems the system had. And I think it's a shame that they didn't lead with a proper 3D Sonic game. It's a shame that Sega didn't give it the resources. This was their mascot. This was their big hitter for the West. The fact that Sega of America and Sega of Japan failed to actually create one is one of the biggest, the sorrowing tales for me. I think it's the saddest thing for Sega Saturn is it didn't have a dedicated 3D Sonic game. I think you can see there's a game called Sonic Jam, which is a compilation of Sonic's 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles in one disc, and it's actually got a 3D environment where you see Sonic running around and he jumps into a portal, and that then becomes Sonic 2 or whatever, and you play Sonic 2, and that actually shows that Sonic could work in 3D, but it just didn't have the resources. That little playground shows Sonic in 3D. It shows that it could have worked in 3D, but it didn't. And I hope in future. I know there's something in the comment section that Saturn Mini. I hope that they do finish it for Saturn Mini. That's a pipe dream because I know it will probably never happen. But I hope they are. But there's Sonic 3D Blast on Sega Saturn. Makes me a bit sad. Myst is the PC game. It's all over the place. This is a game that you've obviously seen me with the gun pointing at you for. It's got Virtua Cop 2.
Virtual Cop.
You want to be a policeman? This is it. I love the Virtua Cop 3 in the arcades I played. I love Virtua Cop 2.
Virtual Cop 2 was huge in the arcades here in the Philippines.
Time Crisis was the other one, but
Time Crisis was
playing, to be honest. I love these sort of games.
That is, I'd say Virtua Cop 2 has to rank as one of the best 5+ beer games that you can have. If you've had more than 5 beers, trying to play Virtua Cop 2 with your friends is hilarious.
What? And you're weaving around like, man, I can't get that one.
That's how we used to come back from pub. Me and my mates used to come back from pub, put Phil Saturn on, and we used to get all these games on that we were showing Daytona and Baku and all games like that. And Virtua Cop, honestly, it was just such a laugh.
You'd have an agreement. All right, man, I'll take the left side. You'll take the right. Sure. Okay. Wait, which part is the left again? Okay, whatever.
The other guy's slacking, so you got no choice but to help him. That's the other problem.
Yeah. All right.
Another game, I wish I just mentioned it, which was House of the Dead on this thing.
Oh, that was a good one.
It was on eBay for 100, but I realized I can't justify that cost because I can now mod a Saturn. So that's what it was. But House of the Dead would have been a nice one for the collection as well. There's a Switch remake as well that I have. I have it on remake on Switch, and that's actually quite good. I'm sure you have it on PlayStation 4 shop as well. That was good that they did that. Athlete things. These are just my sports games, which I don't.
We're getting into the territory of obscure games, which I absolutely love. Okay.
Given to me, but athlete things.
Show the back, Viraj. What kind of game is it?
So it says. Okay, we go. That's it.
So it's like an athletic simulator, shall we say?
Track and field wannabe? I don't know.
I mean, I'd go for it. I'd still play it.
Join 8 international Olympic athletes as they complete in 10 decathlon disciplines. Never thought running, jumping, and throwing could be such fun. In a brilliantly quirky AM3 conversion that brings steel-hard competition to the home.
I'd still play it. I would play it. I would play that one.
I know you would.
Yeah.
This one is another one you play.
Oh, I would play that one too. Yes.
Yeah. The graphics on this are actually really good for its time, I'd say. I was actually amazed at just how good.
Yeah, I definitely play that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd play it too.
For those in the audio podcast, show that again, Viraj. The title is Pebble Beach Golf Links, and it's a golf game. It seems to have some really good graphics. If you guys are looking for an off the track game, that would be the one to look for. I mean, if you're a Tiger Woods fan as well.
You play 4-player golf here.
There you go.
As well, so there we go. And last and least, I'd say, is Sega Worldwide Soccer 97. Again, this is gifted to me.
Soccer 97. Okay.
So there you go, and that's
Yeah, the
basically.
biggest game in the world, which is surprisingly not very big in the Philippines. But then again, I attribute that to the fact that we don't have very large fields to play soccer in. You know.
Yeah, well, whatever, man. But that's my collection that I have. There are other games, yes, that I don't have, with regret. Burning Rangers, okay, Dragon Saga, Die Hard Arcade. Yeah, these are big hitters that people talk about, and I don't have in my collection. I could buy them, but I'm thinking with the other alternative ways to get these games and get access, it's not a big deal. So I don't have some of the more expensive Saturn games, but even what I've shown you is actually they're quite expensive. These games now. I'm thinking, okay, fine, I might shift it. It's over £100, a couple of £100 worth of games I've got here. Now I might as well just use that money, sell this, use that money to subsidize, and I'm great. So it's at that point now. Unless you are a Saturn collector and you care about Sega Saturn and you want that to be a thing, by all means do it. If you want to pay that king's ransom, do it. And there is a cult following for Saturn on the Sega Saturn collectors group on Facebook. I've seen whenever someone buys a Saturn game, somebody puts the Ric Flair main going, woo! Ric Flair like doing his little moves and all that stuff that he used to do with his bling bling, and he used to show off and all this stuff. And I think that's where it will come from. Ric Flair was unofficial. Now he's the Sega Saturn mascot because you got to
unofficially speaking. Okay,
be wealthy to buy Sega Saturn and I'd be happy to spend that kind of money. And there are people out there. There are loads of people out there that would love to collect for Sega Saturn. And they do collect for Sega Saturn. I think it's a thing. And I, as you know, guys, I do a lot of. I started to buy and sell retro video games at gaming markets. I'm thinking maybe I should take some of this stuff with me and shift it and get some money from it because there are a lot of collectors out there. I was shocked, at just how many collectors there are. You hear about these things. You see it on eBay and Facebook and what people are. You don't really, unless you go to a market and see people willing to pay £180 for a game you paid £30 for all those years ago. Like somebody out there that wants this. It's real, guys. Believe it.
Yeah, that guy right there raising his hand at the bottom of the screen, right there, inside of his.
Stuff. And I'm not going to criticize these people. People go, "Oh, why are you wasting your money on this rubbish?" Like, one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Absolutely, that's true. And that guy raising his hand right there in his van, doing patrols and everything.
But there's no shame in what you do. In fact, I have the utmost respect for people like you because people like you make me rich. So people like you are what fuels retro gaming, which makes it something treasure. I mean, there's some people who collect to preserve, some people collect because they love it. There's not a sin in this, and I understand that collecting Saturn games is probably the most expensive format. Is it the most expensive format to collect for? Even Game Boy Advance?
No. It's far from it, but it is up there. I'd say.
This is a Neo Geo AES now. That's the
oh my gosh, the Neo Geo is my goodness. The actual getting the actual cartridges for the Neo Geo is like way up there. But you're absolutely right, Viraj. People will collect what they want to collect. Some people collect for the nostalgia. Some people collect because they have a particular connection with whatever hardware software it is. Some people like Joe collect a particular genre, like Japanese RPGs. Speaking of which, if Joe might be familiar with this, I only played one Sega Saturn game in preparation for this episode. Of course, I emulated it because I have no access to an actual Sega Saturn game, to a Sega Saturn machine. It's called Guardian Heroes. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one.
Okay.
Yeah, they made that.
I played that one. It's a really good one. I started off on it, and I can see this as a game that I can really get into. It reminds me of the Tales of.
If Sega Mega Drive Genesis had Golden Axe / Streets of Rage, Guardian Heroes is their answer to that for the Sega Saturn. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
They're beat 'em up. They're beat 'em up / RPG elements in there.
There was a Game Boy Advance port of that for those of you who can't emulate Saturn. It's actually a good port for what it's, I think. But
Sega did that.
I don't know if Sega. I think Treasure were responsible for Guardian Heroes. It was there. Also, they were a Sega company, shall we say, back then. Treasure. I think they are or not, but they make those sort of style games, and I did like some of the stuff they put out there. I think if we're looking at Sega Saturn in terms of support, Sega were obviously the front runners for their own system. They'll make games for it, but they had their second party developers like Treasure backing them up with games like Radiant Silvergun as well. But they also had Capcom. They had Capcom on their side this time round, and they were making games for them. The Konami made games. I think the only thing that Sega were at loss at. They should have got Square on board. They should have got Square on board for Sega Saturn, but it doesn't matter. They had a lot on board from 1994 to 1997. This thing was powerful in Japan, and that Japanese library, which I'm alien to. I think you know about this stuff, Sir Joe. So I'm going to hand it to you in regards to what Saturn games you like, because you're into the RPG things, and obviously, as we know, some of the RPGs were in Japan. So you told me about your favorite rocket propelled grenades that you liked.
Okay, so in preparation for this episode, guys, you need to remember. So Sega Saturn, JRPGs, and I'm a guy living in the ghetto, right?
The guy who's in the bang bus right now. Okay.
I'm in the bang bus right now, so all those factors do not mix. Okay, so so the only games that I could probably afford. So most of my games I got from the Sydney retro market, and most of the Saturn games that they were selling are mostly Japanese. Unfortunately, because I'm on the bang bus right now, I don't have my actual CDs here, but I do have them in my inventory. So just a quick rundown on the Japanese titles that I got anyway, and I got them for like Sir Viraj mentioned. If it's if it's an English release, then definitely it's gonna cost a lot more. The Japanese release ones, not so much. So I got the Panzer Dragoon RPG, the Japanese version.
But Panzer Dragoon Saga.
I got
Saga.
yep. Panzer Dragoon Saga RPG. Well, the Japanese version. That's what they call it anyway. Dark Savior, the Japanese version. Grandia, the Japanese version. The Kido Senshi Gundam Gaiden, Japanese version. The Landgreiser 4, Japanese version. Lunar Silver Star, Japanese version.
Big game.
Magic Knight Ray Earth, Japanese version. Maho Gakuen Lunar for the Japanese version. Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story Part 2, Japanese version. Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story 3, Japanese version. Neon Genesis Evangelion Second Impression, Japanese version. Night into Dreams, I got that one, but that's in English.
Yeah, good.
I got the Panzer Dragoon 1, English. The PAL version. Panzer Dragoon Zue, PAL version. Sakura Taisen and Sakura Taisen 2, both Japanese versions. The first Sakura Taisen I'm currently playing right now has a fan translation. I have a few observations about that game. If we still have if I still have the time to talk about that game. Shining the Holy Ark, Japanese version. Shining Wisdom, Japanese version. Shinseki Neon Genesis Evangelion, Japanese version. Slayers, the anime, Slayers Royale, Japanese version. Street Fighter Alpha, Warrior's Dream, that's the PAL version. Terra Fantastica, another JRPG, Japanese version. And Virtua Fighter Kids, PAL version.
Yeah.
And out of all of my collections so far, the top 3 most expensive crap that I got came from the Saturn. Albert Odyssey, Legend of Aldeon, the US version cost me $300 at the time when I got it.
Ouch. Okay.
And my top 2 most expensive crap, Magic Knight Ray Earth, the US version, the last Sega Saturn game ever released, in the US at least, or ever, cost me around $700.
Oh my god.
Complete in box.
Wow.
And the most expensive crap that I have so far goes to Panzer Dragoon Saga, PAL version, all complete 4 discs with the manual.
Yeah, bro.
Almost.
Just checking if the missus is listening in.
almost cost me like 1,000 US dollars just to get that
All
game.
right. Yeah.
That's
Almost
Mm-mm.
almost 1 grand.
All right. Now we have
So
blackmail
yeah,
material for Joe. Okay. There you
yeah. Le-
Listen.
For the record,
Well, it
that's
was
why
old
that's why I live in the ghetto now. Because I sold everything just to get Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Oh my
and you
goodness.
look like a
Okay.
woman. So there's two reasons. Yeah.
So when Joe's kid sometime in the future looks back and checks all the archives, why don't I have college money? Wait a minute. You know, she's got the material right there.
Because I tell you something, so Joe,
Mm.
in years from now, these games are only going to go up. That's the
Yes,
only
very
direction
true,
they're
very
gonna
true.
go.
Think
And
of it, Joe,
in
as
that
an
time, you have
investment.
no love
You
for this
are
anymore.
investing in your kid's future.
You are.
Once you sell this
You are.
stuff, she won't have to worry about the college funds.
That Panzer
Yeah.
Dragoon Saga, it's going to be £1,500.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It
Hey.
will be, and you'll make that £500 profit in like 5 years or
Mhm.
10
That's
years.
true.
maybe
That's true.
short.
Since Joe relayed his collection, I had a really quick look at the search engine as to how many Sega Saturn games there are, all grand total. I was surprised that there are a total of 1,046 games total for the Sega Saturn, which is, I mean, mind blowing considering the fact that so few people know so much about the games that are on the Sega Saturn. There are 1,000 plus games on it, and
So
people
yeah,
just haven't really delved into it, really.
that's right. With Dreamcast, what is it? It's 400, 500 games if you're lucky.
I'd say, yeah.
They had more, but also let's be honest. A lot of these
Mhm.
games are locked to the Saturn, to the Japanese
Mm.
region. It's Japan. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
Saturn.
never would have really heard about Guardian Heroes unless I actually delved into the
Mm.
library. You know,
There's a lot.
How much? How much is Guardian Heroes going right now? Let me just
Mm, I-
let's check.
I
Yes,
wouldn't
sir,
know.
Dan. You were saying.
Dan, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I think that's a problem with gaming at the minute because the mainstream kind of forgets about all these fantastic games. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of
Holy shit! Okay.
It's about £100. Guardian Heroes for £100. It's £100 on eBay. I'm looking at it now.
£100 in eBay, $200 here. I can see.
Okay. Well, finish your point, Dan. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that. So one game that's not even been mentioned yet. I know. I don't think. Well, there's two games. I don't think Joe mentioned Dragon Force. Do you not mention Dragon Force? Which is,
I haven't. I haven't got that yet.
yeah,
Dragon Force.
Another fantastic JRPG, but another set of games that have totally gone bypast everyone, and probably two of the best arcade stroke action adventure games, depends how you class them, of the year, and that's the Dungeons and Dragons games, the Towers over Mysteria.
Oh.
No, sorry, Tower of Doom and Shadows over Mysteria,
Mhm.
and they're both on one Saturn.
Oh, it's just yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, I love that. I love the arcade one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that type of thing that people aren't even aware that's on Saturn. You know what
And
I
just
mean?
on Saturn. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Have you got Shining Force 3 on Sega Saturn?
The Japanese version. I got Holy Ark and Wisdom.
Right.
No, you ain't got three. So yeah, again, that's another massive top.
Well, that
dollar.
was only part. The funny thing is, Shining Force 3. This is what I read about. It was only the first part of 3 of these games. So I think Shining Force 3 came out just for us in the West, but there were
3
2 other
books,
parts. They were launched only in Japan, which is a travesty, really. And I think Camelot. That's where Camelot sort of left Sega because they felt a bit used. But they made some good games on the system.
I mean, I guess when you stop and think about it, Sega might want to delve into their back catalog of Sega Saturn games and then re-release them, and maybe retranslate them and re-release them, and they might make some money off of it. You know,
the problem with that, I'll give you an example. So, for example, they lost the source code to Panzer Dragon Saga.
well, that's
I heard. Yep. Oh, yep. I know the story.
There were rumors of how they found it again and stuff like this. So it's a bit of ambiguity here, but you would have thought that.
Oh, you know what, Sir Viraj, you mentioned they lost a source code for that. They also lost a source code for Magic Knight Ray Earth when they were about to release it in the West.
Yeah.
So they had to do it from scratch just to localize that shit. But you were saying,
well, it's a shame that there are barriers here, and they have. I think the legacy. If we're moving on from the software side of things, and we go when we talk about the legacy of the Saturn, I mean, say if you want to play it now, yes, we'll get to the point where it does cost the king's ransom to get the games. Unless you're a fanatic like yourself, and even to some extent myself. But there are those people who think, well, okay, we can modify Saturn, which is quite cost effective in the long term, and that's always the wise way to go. So there is that aspect. But then, and there's also emulations, or other ways you can play Saturn. But also on modern systems, there have been modern ports such as Panzer Dragon, which you just mentioned earlier. There was a port that House of the Dead. There's a remake.
All right, so we got 10 more minutes before ending the show. How about with Sir Virach's point and Sir Joel's right here? Let's talk about the possibility of a Sega Saturn Mini. Go.
It's
licensing will be the biggest barrier for the release of a Sega Saturn Mini. As is anything when it comes to mini consoles, licensing any game is a horrendous nightmare. Every single aspect of a game, whether it's the graphics, the sound, the mechanics, all of those are copyrighted, trademarked, and they have to license that. So a Sega Saturn Mini would probably be quite an endeavor. It's a question of whether Sega will think of it as profitable enough after all the licensing costs to actually do a Sega Saturn Mini. I hope they do, but
the poll said that. Well, so when the Mega Drive Mini 2 came out, the Japanese version, there was a QR code on the box, and people would scan it, and it would link to a Twitter or X. It's called X now. Stupid reading. Right? But anyway, people would be able to vote as to what they wanted their next Sega Mini consoles to be. So they would then take it on board, and then the polls came out, and then obviously when all the people voted, the polls came out, and number one, well, surprise, surprise, it's a Japanese exclusive poll, pretty much. Sega Saturn came out on top. So, the Saturn will rise again in the form of a Mini. I think they know they're gonna. Because Sega isn't the good thing about Sega, which is a bad thing about Sega, is Sega aren't the big player like Nintendo or Sony or Xbox out there. So their intermediary strategy, this is what they've said, is to make mini consoles. It's a good way of them regarnering their fandom and looking after their legacy. And you're absolutely right. Obviously, licensing cost is a big deal with this thing. The software that's going to be on it. And also the cost of making this to make money. Now, there was recently, I think it was a CES, a company showed a mini Saturn. I don't know who they are, I forget the whole thing, that they could make it on like a Pi device or something, and they could have Saturn games emulated using original FPGA, which is basically the original hardware style of the way the game should play. It's not emulation; it's the way that the hardware would have represented the game on television. And it showed. I didn't see a demo of it, but that's what they were saying it could do. And I have seen other people make Raspberry Pis of mini Saturns in the Saturn community and saying, okay, this is how it is. Obviously, it hasn't got the nice swanky GUI that the Mega Drive Mini has, but that's not going to be hard for Sega to do themselves. I think Sega are biding their time to try and cheapen the cost, because they did say, even when the Mega Drive Mini came out, and this has been a discussion going on, Yusuke Okanari, the father of the Mega Drive Mini, has said explicitly, we're just waiting for those 3D chips to go down in price so we can mass produce this thing, make it affordable. Licensing libraries are important. It's a big deal for Sega of Japan, because as we know, and as we discussed in this video, this was their lone success in Japan for Sega, the Sega Saturn. Yeah, as weird as it may sound, this was a success for them. It's a big deal for the Japanese market. They want to make sure that they make this thing good and beautiful for their people. Whether it'll go out and be an international release in America and Europe, that might be another thing that they'll have to consider, since it was mostly successful in Japan. Another thing that you have to consider is they sold 10 million of these units worldwide. The Mega Drive sold 40 million worldwide. So it makes sense to make a mini of that. How many minis? So the Mega Drive Mini sold 1 million units worldwide. Let's put it that way. If you're only going to make a Saturn Mini and it only sold a quarter of that worldwide, does that mean we make 250,000? Is it even worth us making that to sell all worldwide? Are we going to make a good return on investment then? And if you're looking at it just...
I think that decision is a little bit premature on their part. It's just that, okay, so most people chose PlayStation rather than the Saturn. However, as the years went on, people are looking back. Oh, the Saturn ain't so bad at all.
There's an X
maybe we should check out the Saturn. So why are they looking at the past numbers, not looking at the demand now?
It's become a cult system. It's a phenomena. It's expensive to collect for. This is another way to experience the Saturn at a budget cost. The question is, how much would you pay for a Saturn Mini? That's the question. Would you pay £200 for it? Would you pay $200 for a Saturn Mini?
Easy.
You pay $200 for
Easy.
it. What, with only 20 games? 20 games, $200.
I will leave it together for. I will leave it together for 20 more years. Sure, that's fine.
Well, I'd pay $200 for quality games. We're talking about games that may be translated into English that never got released in the West that
Yep.
are rated
Yep.
as
Yep.
the very
That's
best
not
games
gonna
on the
happen.
Sega Saturn.
That's not going to happen.
Mm,
We'll get a Western library.
Yeah, but if you've got games like so a great example is
You might
Mega
get
Drive,
something
Mega Drive Mini 2. You got Crusader Ascension on there, which is a fortune to buy. So
Yeah.
again, if they included something like the Dragoon Saga, which obviously the source code's a problem, but if they included games like that on there, then it becomes an attractive investment.
Mike Kubishek in the chat says 100%. I'd pay $300 for
Just for
Right.
$300, sure.
Can I play this on a Saturn Mini? How are we going to play my light gun games, guys? Do we have?
That's the big thing.
Like,
You
you know, when they had the Cyber Stick for the Mega Drive Mini, you had to pay like over £100 just for the accessory. Would they create a Singen light gun so I could play this game on there?
You'd have Virtua Cop 1 and 2 and Out of the Dead.
You can play them with a controller, but it's not the right way. You need
that wouldn't be the way to do it. No.
But you got three top dollar light gun games there.
Yeah.
Virtua Cop 1 and 2 and Out of the Dead, and I'd buy peripherals when you got three. You know, you're talking three massive arcade hits there. So yeah, of course you would. I'll play Night of the Dead in that arcade place a few months back, and it was fantastic.
And light gun technology is very, very catching up nowadays because they have light guns that connect to USB and have sensors on top. Very much Wii technology, but still, it works. Nowadays, light guns are being produced that actually work on modern televisions.
So the question
Okay, how about we do fantasy games, like fantasy football kind of thing? What are the games that would you like to be in there, just in case, just for discussion's sake?
Well, Guardian Heroes definitely has to be in there.
Guardian Heroes,
Okay,
Shining Force.
Let's have a look at
Shining Force,
English translations.
Hands of Dragoon, the Dragoon 2,
Dragoon Saga,
Nights in the Dream.
Yep.
There. Christmas Nights, there might be a bonus title on there. Okay.
Okay, I'm not gonna count that.
Legends of Oasis.
Legends of Oasis. Okay, there you go.
5. That's 5.
Shining Force 3.
So
That's
you mentioned
6.
that already, right? Oh no, you haven't put that in. Okay.
Saturn Bomberman, best version of Bomberman. there is.
Best
That's
Bomberman
7.
era. Okay, so we have that. Now, are we going to put Fighting Vipers on this thing?
Ooh.
We need a fighting game.
I'd have X-Men versus Street Fighter.
Well, I already said Virtua Fighter 1 and 2, but yeah, you can have one of those Capcom games. You can only have one because they can afford the license one. And
I'd still say Virtua Fighter because Virtua Fighter
should
really,
go in there. Yep, the first party should go in there. Definitely some Virtua Fighter. Yep.
You've got to have Daytona and Sega Rally.
Daytona, sure. You need a racing gear in there. Racing game, sure.
You definitely need Battle Garaga and Radiant Silvergun because they're the two best shooters of the
shooters. Yep, that's 10.
We're not going to get that because it's a Japanese game. But all right.
Ed Reyes' suggestion of Castlevania Symphony of the Night can't Ed's because it's mostly a.
If Konami says yes, sure. If they're not gonna be so bitchy about it,
they will not translate that game. They're not going to do it. They didn't do Rondo of Blood on PC Engine. Why would they
Probably not. And also because of the fact that Sega would likely look into their internal library first because they already own this stuff in there. They don't have to go license.
Mike says Vampire Savior, Darkstalkers, Capcom.
Maybe they could get the license for Darkstalkers. They could do it. They could do Darkstalkers on the Saturn. What about? Did I mention?
I like D&D though. The Dungeons and Dragons, as Sir Dan mentioned. Gotta put that in there.
Yeah. And that's one game. The two of those are on one game, so
put it in there. The Mystaria version, yeah.
So how many games have in that game so far? How many we got? We got 20 yet.
Yeah, we got 20. So we still got 8 more.
Albert Odyssey.
Albert's Odyssey, and my RPG needs to be in. I need my RPGs in there. Gotta get my $300 worth. Come on.
What about
if I'm gonna buy a mini, come on, give me more compelling reasons to buy it.
Burning Rangers.
Burning Rangers.
Great shot. Yeah.
Burning Rangers.
What about virtual on?
Nah.
You'd need to have the sticks with that, wouldn't you? With virtual on, that'd be.
There's that. That's the mecha game, right?
No. Virgin Rangers is.
I
No, no,
need,
no,
I
no.
need,
The virtual on.
I need one pervy game. Come on,
Ah,
Sakura Wars.
Sakura Wars. Not even. No. You know
We're
what?
not going to get a game in the West. We're not
Screw
going to have
screw Sakura Wars. It not even soft core. Not really.
Do we mention Panzer Dragoon Saga?
Yeah, in there.
All right.
Oh no. But do we do the Saga RPG or just or the rail shooter one?
I'd have Zwei and Saga out the two.
Zwei and Saga. Okay.
Yeah.
But you could also have Tomb Raider and Resident Evil on this thing. The director's cut that was on the. Yeah. Why not have Tomb Raider on there and Resident Evil director's cut? And why not have Mortal Kombat Trilogy on there? Because that was the best Mortal Kombat. Like have all three on. Because Mortal Kombat's not made a mini debut yet. Yeah. Mortal Kombat Trilogy on the
Sir.
Oh, that's the first.
Sir Ed says Bloody Bride. Checking.
There's also Police
Bloody
Law.
Bride.
What?
What is that? Bloody Bride for the Sega Saturn.
Police Noughts. You got
Oh yeah, Police Knots. Yeah, Japanese only.
Clockwork Knight.
Yeah, great shot.
Forgot about that.
Alien Trilogy. You just said we missed Alien Trilogy.
Yeah, Alien Trilogy could be on there, but they have to pay Disney a king's ransom for that.
Oh yeah, of
yeah.
course.
Aliens are basically Disney princesses nowadays.
Yeah,
Okay.
In all fairness, what I think would look, this is what I think would really push a Saturn Mini, guys. You tell me if you agree with me or not. Okay, if Sega pulled their finger out, got a development team to actually build Sonic Extreme from scratch and make it actually good for an exclusive title for a Saturn Mini, boom, you got the Sonic fandom, got the mandem, it will do well. That's what I will say. I'll say that. If Sega just do that and make that extra effort, that extra finish, they'll do that. If they have a light gun game, they always have some sort of gimmick. They had like obviously the the Cyber Stick for the Mega Drive Mini 2, which was good for Afterburner 2. If they launch a premium accessory, which is like pretty much half the cost of the Mini, if you're saying the Saturn Mini is like at $200, yeah. If they have something like that, like the Virtual On sticks for that game, for Virtual On, or if they have a light gun you could buy for any of the House of the Dead or Virtual Cop games, you buy for your Saturn Mini, people will buy it. People will line up for it and buy it. I say that, but then $200, $300 is an expensive proposition for a system that's over 20 years old. And are people going to say this is more money for old rope? But then the question is the X factor, which Sir Joe just mentioned, which is the Saturn is a curiosity, it's an oddity. Just because it sold 10 million worldwide doesn't mean that the mini sales is going to be restricted to 250,000. It could be 1 million of these minis sell because people are curious about it. Saturn is a bitch to emulate. It's not accessible for a lot of people. This is a budget solution and an easy solution for many people. Yes, $200 is a lot of money because of inflation and whatever, but I think that you have a Saturn Mini with 20 to 30 games, because now Sega with their last Mini, they said, we're going to have 62 games on it. That's a lot of games on the Mini too. And it was $105 and people complained about that, but 62 games, guys. And even though you're not going to play all of those games, they're not going to appeal to you, they had enough of an array, like quarter of those games were worth it. And also the value of the games like Crusader Ascenti made it worth buying the Mini in the first place. And it's not Sega CD stuff. It is a budget solution. And if Sega have titles on this that people will think, they'll buy this thing for $200 because the title on its own is worth over $200. People buy it. And if they put Panzer Dragoon Saga on this thing, find in the source code or remake it from scratch and have it on there, $200 would be like a bargain for a lot of people. So Panzer Dragoon Saga, and if they were making Sonic Extreme from scratch and they had like a nice solution with a light gun with Virtua Cop 2 on this thing for $200, and also you buy the light gun stuff, you might have to pay extra for it. But I would buy it. I'll pay $200 with the light gun and that and those games that I just mentioned. It's worth it. It's worth it, and it's worth it for so many people who want to pay it and have a budget solution. They plug it into TV, HDMI out, Bob's your uncle, you're done. So I do think a Saturn Mini is feasible. It's just Sega are looking at their margins to see, can we mass produce this? How many can we sell, and can we make a sizable profit that makes it worthwhile? It will happen. It's just a matter of when, not if. That's my final.
Well, I think you'll be happy with Raymond Orendez's post here. Raymond being one of our one of our panelists here. Honestly, my heart belongs to Saturn, even though PS1 was famous in my timeline. There you
Yeah.
go. That's it. That's about the best compliment that we can get from
Yeah.
all the chats here, because at the very end of it, you play what you like, you enjoy what you have,
Mm.
and you share what you love too, because some people might start to enjoy it as well. There you
Yeah.
go. All
I think
right.
there's one
So,
comment here that was a while ago, and I never really got to address it actually. And it's by
now which one was that one?
it's by Marlon Hurtado LS.
It's Cupidus. Yes.
Your name wrong, but yeah. Sega Saturn port of Castlevania Symphony Night was an exclusive item, exclusive to locations, exclusive to familiars, and mid-slow FPS. So I will say this, because there's a hot and cold thing for Castlevania Symphony Night on the Saturn version. It's a shame that it's not to the Japanese region. I believe there's a language translation patch out there. Yeah, there is a language translation patch for that game, so it can be done, and you can play it in English. I know somebody, I think it was Mr. Belmont, who said that the graphics look as good as the PS1. One thing I didn't say about the Saturn hardware was it does actually create polygons in quadrilaterals and not in triangles. That was interesting. So it was very, very hard to render 2D games that had 3D aspects to look as good as maybe the PlayStation and the N64, which had triangular looking polygons. Because to be honest, PlayStation was also quadrilaterals as well, but they actually put the thing to zero, so it looked more better, and it was easier to make 3D games for because of that. But going back, I don't think the graphics for the Sega Saturn version of Castlevania is that bad. I think it's actually decent for what it is. And one thing I'll say about the Sega Saturn Castlevania Symphony Night is I like the backgrounds. I think it had better backgrounds than the PlayStation because of how it looked. So I think there are extras there, and I also like the fact that it is a bigger game on Saturn, and I do think that is the complete version. Even though the original director will say the PlayStation 1 is fine, I think Koji Igarashi said the PlayStation 1 is the game, but I do think that it's a nice bonus to have an extended cut, which is what the Saturn version is. It would be nice if there was an extended, if they put that on a Saturn Mini in English language, but I know they won't. But then the other part of it is that, and this is something that I shouldn't really say, but I'll say it anyway, because a lot of people look at these minis to hack and mod. And we're getting to a point now where people would like a Sega Saturn to play because emulating it is hard. But if you can hack a Saturn Mini, you're laughing. You can play these games and you can add English language patches and all sorts of things on it, which are really good. And you can do that with the original Saturn as well when you mod it that way. So you can play that game with an English translation doing that way. So there are ways now, and this is happening in the modding community. And I think this is a godsend because, as we have just mentioned now, everything holy just happens to come out in the Japan regions and we can't get our fingers on it. The fact that we have a community out there, which I love and I have the utmost respect for, which are doing English translation patches for these games, allowing us to modify these games to play them in our regions so we can play them on our hardware, is a godsend. And I like to thank those people who do that, because those people are really kings out there. They're the people.
Yes, they're honestly doing a tremendous service for people like us who are monolingual, or maybe bilingual, and are unlucky in that that we don't have the proficiency to speak in Japanese or Chinese or things like that. So many props to them, much props to them, and very, very thankful to them, because you guys are doing what you can to forward the cause of game preservation. Mhm. All
All
right.
right.
Here's a maybe the last question we'll take for the evening. I don't know if you guys talked about this already. Disregard if answered. What were the key factors that contributed to the Sega Saturn's commercial struggles, and how has its legacy influenced the gaming industry today? We
Okay,
talked
each
about a little
panel
bit
will
about.
answer this one.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear Dan's take on it first. Then
Yeah,
We kind of already covered that, haven't we, with the Sega
kind of
Saturn?
covered about the commercial struggles, but how about its legacy? The ripples that it has sent out?
The unwritten legacy, really, for me, actually, is twofold. Two of my favorite genres: shoot 'em ups and JRPGs. I think the Saturn's a massively underrated system for both of them, and everybody will credit Final Fantasy and PlayStation's RPGs like Xenogears and such forth for making the genre popular, and it did. But in Japan, where the Saturn were massive, you had all these JRPGs like Panzer Dragoon Saga that again pushed that genre big time, and the shoot 'em ups are fantastic. We've just done Joe's Joe, 20, and I personally would have had Batsagan and Thunder Force 5 in there, and neither of them got a look in, and they're two mint games. You know what I mean? So I think that the Saturn, was actually peak arcade gaming at its best. It wasn't as the Mega Drive had a broader scope, and for me is my preferred system because all the genres are covered in more depth. But the Saturn really just brought that arcade experience home, whilst the arcades were still relevant. And then sadly, it all died away. So for me, that's its key legacy, really.
Another thing I want to add, actually, that I didn't before when I talked about all its failings, which is early in the video. You can catch up if you want to listen to me go on about all the things that Sega overstretched. They marketed all that stuff that I was talking about. One of the things that I didn't touch, and I spoke to Dan about this before, they didn't bring out what those games like Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, all those franchises, their IPs that made them great on the Mega Drive and transitioned them to Saturn. Nintendo always played it safe by having Zelda, Mario on their next platform. Star Fox. They
Zelda.
Their IPs that made them great, that they were known for. Like they should have been a Golden Axe game on Saturn. They should have at least ported Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder, which was a System 32 game in the arcade.
Streets of Rage, goddammit!
And Streets of Rage 4, we've got Streets of Rage 4 now, but it should have happened then, counter where people were watching. I was actually driving my train yesterday. I was at work going home. There's a driver who got in with me, and he didn't know Streets of Rage 4 was a game. Because Sega just aren't there anymore. They're not in the forefront. And I had to tell him, not get it on PS4, just download it. It's a great game. And he's going to do it now. But because Sega had the limelight on them, they could have brought their IPs to the front, and it was an easy buck for them to make because the IPs sold half the game already.
But that's one of the. I think you're dead right, mate. I think you're dead right. But that's one of the reasons that I love Sega, because they were always trying to push the boundaries and be original. You look at Knights; they had the bollocks to turn around and say, "Forget Sonic. We've done Sonic." It's like a good artist, a good musician. I've done them albums. I want to experiment. I want to do my progressive rock album now, and that's what they did with Knights. I thought, forget Sonic, let's get Knights because we're that good. We're gonna give something original. It didn't work from a business angle. You're totally right, but
this is a business we're talking about. I understand there's the artist and there's the business side of things, but
exactly.
They should have.
Well, should have combined it more. They should have had a better balance. And you said right, Golden Axe, the Revenge of a Death Adder. That is the one, mate. That is the one. Why that did not appear? That was an arcade machine, a great follow-up to a great series, and why that didn't appear on Saturn is a mystery.
This whole saga actually just brings to mind this scripture quote: "A house divided against itself shall not stand." So that's precisely what happened from my observation, from my reading of Console Wars, and from my observation of what happened. I guess in my case, the thing is the infighting, the envy, the greed, not so much greed as it is like the jealousy in between both sides of the Atlantic for Sega, both the Sega of Japan and Sega of America, really did things bad, did Sega dirty, and didn't even give the sequel console, the Sega Dreamcast, the attention that it rightfully deserved. A lot of people still have love for that one. So
I just want to say, just to answer his second part of his question, which is how its legacy influenced the gaming industry today. I think there are a lot of mistakes made, and people have learned from those mistakes Sega had made. I think that's what it was. And I think on the business side of things, we can learn from the mistakes and learn what Sega did wrong, not just with Saturn, but all their add-ons and all the business decisions they made. I think other companies have learned what not to do. But the flip side of it is, and this links to what Sir Dan has just said about art. Yeah, it's about art. And in terms of the creativity aspect of it, I think it definitely laid a benchmark into like how to make really, really fun, innovative games. And I think that it put Sega at the forefront for those who are looking looking at really lovely, artistically well-made games, and not just Sega, but all the third parties that developed for the platform as well. So I have to say that there's something to be said about that. Just touching your note about Sega going on and moving on to Dreamcast, I think a lot of people said Sega Saturn was a flop and all this stuff. Sega Saturn actually did make money for Sega in spite of all the crap that was going on. If you actually look at the P&L, and you're an accountant, and you know what I mean when I say P&L, profit and loss. They're actually making money, but it's only when after 97, 98, when they actually lost all the footing with Saturn, and when they were actually spending copious amounts of cash developing the Dreamcast. They basically, what they did was they just gambled on Dreamcast. They just threw all this money at Dreamcast. It launched, it didn't return, and that's why they were millions in the red. And that's why Sega are just lucky to still be in it, making software at the very least. As they were lucky they were bailed out by a CEO that threw money and helped bail them out. He gave their fortune, he gave his millions to Sega because he loved the brand. But also, Sammy came in and they collaborated with Sega and they kept them. But it's a shame that Sega had to leave the hardware business. But that's another story altogether.
Yeah, and what's the quote? And that's all she wrote. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there should have been more conservative after Saturn, but that's a discussion when we cover the Dreamcasts. But that's really all I have to say. I think Sega's Saturn. If you look at the Saturn in terms of its legacy and how it's influenced it, so just reiterating my point, not to make the same mistakes. All those other people learn not to make the same mistake. But then that being said, I think a lot like PlayStation 3 was another over-engineered thing that they did, but Sony's brand was just so powerful they'll have to take a hit on it for what it was. But again, that's another over-engineered console if you actually look at the guts of it. But I think a lot of people learned to keep things a bit more simple with Saturn, and I think also at the same time, in terms of the creativity aspect of it, they learned at what games could be more marketable and learn from what Sega's mistakes are, which is just to keep things relevant and make sure that you've got good software that people are going to know about and continue with sequels. But then at the same time, I think Dan will agree. Dan's point is true because this is what's happening today. This is an original when they brought this out. People, I think, are tired of seeing sequel after sequel after sequel. Yeah, why don't we have something original? And we're not just talking video games; we're talking about movies as well.
Yeah. We're talking just to extend that. That is it for me. It's that time. It's the 80s and the early to mid 90s mentality of that balance of artistic input and executive input. There were a much more exciting balance. Nowadays, everybody's dollar first, which is great. You've got to make your money, but you want to create shit and all, don't you? You want to do things. You know what I mean? And that for me is that's Sega in general. That's one of the reasons that I love the brand, because they were risk takers, they were innovators. Everybody calls Nintendo innovators. They turned out Mario and Zelda a million times and did save things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, they haven't innovated in terms of, yes, they made games like Pikmin and stuff like that. They have innovated. Yeah. They always played it safe by having their franchise up front, which is why they're still in the game. Whereas Sega, I think
Sega just went wild. Sega were like a dude you want at your party. You know what I mean? It were like I say, Knights is a great example. Let's just do something original. And the gaming landscape is definitely a worse place for Sega, for 90s Sega and 80s Sega not being around in that capacity still, because if they were still operating like they were and operating off the cuff of the seat like they were with that attitude, we'd be getting people like Nintendo and Sony would be scared to stagnate on the franchises that they are doing, because there'd be more original stuff coming out. So it's a shame, really.
It's great that they are original, but they still should have supported their original IPs. Like, I would have loved to have seen a Vector Man in 3D. They could have done that. They could have made it work, but they could have. So coulda, woulda, shoulda, but would have. It's one of those ones. But yes, on one hand, they were unbalanced by being too creative, too artistic, and they let themselves go. But they created some beautiful art. That's the thing. But
exactly, and that's you can't. It's.
I think people learn from that, and then I think Nintendo learned, and a lot of them realized, look, we want to keep franchises relevant. We want to keep something successful. We keep making sequels for it, which is great. But where's the original? Who's making the original stuff? And I'm not saying there's no original stuff out now. There is some great original stuff coming out. And I do think, in my opinion, I think even today, modern gaming, there are a lot of sequelitis, but there are a lot of original concepts being offered out there. So I think there is a good balance out there now in terms of original, because there's so much variety and there's so much for everyone. Another thing I want to add with Saturn as well, very quickly, is a lot of people have said the Saturn was a great 2D machine, and the 3D stuff wasn't all that great. I will say I disagree with that, because the 3D stuff never really got a chance to shine. But the 2D stuff, yes, it was great. I will say, I know you love your shooters, Sedan. I think the problem with the shoot 'em up genre, even at that stage, there were people who love shooters, and they always will do, even today. But I think with the advent of 3D gaming technology, people are looking at other genres to enjoy themselves with. And I think like people thought, oh, really? Do we want to play 2D games in the fifth generation?
Completely. At that time, they were at that time they'd become old out, which is totally understandable.
And even the the Sony CEO said we're not going to have any 2D games on our PlayStation. Sony of America, he said no, we're not going to have any 2D games for our system. It's going to be purely 3D, and he pushed it. Whether that's the right call or wrong call, because he was asked to U-turn on that decision, and eventually they started having more 2D games on the PlayStation. That's why we have a lot more PAL 2D titles on our PlayStations, actually, which the Americans never got. But, because of that push for 3D, which Sony forced the hand of the entire gaming industry, Sega, I think Sega didn't really want to go in 3D yet, and they weren't ready for it. And then they were forced to do it as well. Even though they did create Virtua Fighter, which is the first 3D game, they had to go in that direction. And that was also a time where a lot of gaming studios failed and died because they couldn't grasp 3D. They didn't have the money for it, and you just see them just make 2D games and they just disappeared. The ones that could keep with 3D, the big companies like Capcom, Konami, they're still around today. So I think that there's something to be said about that. 3D games were in their infancy; they were in that era. And let's be honest here, a lot of the first 3D games are just jarring to look at now, and they're not that good. And there was a lot of crap on the PlayStation. Bubsy 3D, I got it for Christmas. I thought it was the best thing, and then I realized how crap it was. And then I had it, and I thought, oh, this is cool, and it's a game with personality. But I realized the way it played was just really bad. I didn't enjoy it compared to
but I was exactly the same with Nintendo 64. My worst system, hated it. Mario 64, everybody raved on about it. I thought it was garbage. I'm like, where's all the snappiness? Where's all the quick pace? It wasted time. So just want to say hello to Josh, by the way, for joining us. So hello, Josh.
All right. Hello, Joshua Hunt in the chats. Thank you very much for joining us. And I guess that's how we wrap things up then, Joe. Go ahead.
Okay, so we'll end the show probably with my take on the question that Sir Jomar posted here. In terms of the legacy, I believe that the legacy of the Sega Saturn still falls to all of us who grew up in the 90s, of the console wars of the 90s. We were the soldiers of the console wars of the 90s. Whether you're a Sega fanboy, Nintendo fanboy, or Sony, yes, we had our allegiances, but to each its own. We had our own respects to each other with the different brands, and the mere fact that there are still us veterans, the gaming veterans, who are still talking about the Sega Saturn up to this day, still proves that Sega is still somewhat relevant. Whether it's a Dreamcast, whether it's a Saturn, whether it's the Mega Drive, or the Mark One, or the Master System, So it's just so because back then we can only we were kids, we were young back then. We can only afford one system. We can only choose one system. So you can only choose one on one side, but you always imagine, what if I could have both? One friend of yours playing PlayStation, another one's playing Nintendo, and you're playing with Sega. Needless to say, those friends of yours would like to experience the other friend's system. And with Sega, on my personal experience, because I went with the PlayStation, I never even knew there was a 32X. I never even knew there was a Sega CD. Hell, I even know there was a Sega Saturn. But years later, when I found out that there was a Saturn and Dreamcast, with the library of games that they had, I'm already done with the PlayStation 1. I still crave for that 90s style RPG gaming, right? So the Saturn was the next best thing. Unfortunately, there are not enough localized RPGs for the Saturn, and even if they are, if you're going to buy them now, they're crazy expensive. That's why we do the modding, right? So if we are going to the extra mile of modding, getting a Saturn, modding it, ripping it, having a pseudo Saturn on it, just so that we can experience the Saturn, still plays onto the legacy, for better or for worse, right? Uh, Sega, we really hope that you still proceed with the Mini. Time will tell if the technology is much better in the future, if the component parts are a bit more cheaper for mass production. Even a limited release would be good. For now, at least there's at least by acknowledging that it's still that it exists, right? Should still solidify its footprint on the gaming history. And that's the show, guys. Thank you all so much for staying here with us, and all of you who are chatting down there, who stayed with us. You are all also wonderful. So my thanks as well to the panel. So let's do our shameless plugs. Let's do it, Sir Joel. Where can they find you?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for hanging around. We highly appreciate everybody who's here in the chat and who is watching live. And of course, we very, very much appreciate all the ones who are listening to us in the audio portion of the podcast. You can find me under the Banyagang Native banner on kick.com and on twitch.com. Just do a really quick search on the search bar up on top. Just type in Banyagang Native, and you'll find me streaming a variety of games, lots of fishing games, which Viraj and Dan are completely baffled by. But what can I say? That's what I'm into nowadays. Just search for me on Kick and on Twitch. Hashtag FUFB. On to you.
Thank you for that, Sir Joel. How about Sir Dan?
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for watching and listening. If you want to find more of me and Seviraj, we will be at the Sega Mega Masters YouTube channel, and we'll be covering it's main. Like I say, it's 8-bit and 16-bit master system and Mega Drive that we're looking at in the minute, and we've got a few guys on that we're going to be interviewing. We're going to be interviewing one of Midway's guys who created General Chaos and Arch Rivals and Rampage, the arcade, pretty shortly. So come and join us, or come and see us at the Sega Genesis group. So enjoy yourselves. Have a good weekend.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Dan, and Sir Viraj, who
Hey.
who carried this episode on his back. He really didn't need us.
I did need you guys because it's good to have questions asked about something because perspective is a very important thing, and I want to know your perspectives on this. Sega Saturn, sure, you have to play this. You must play Sega Saturn. You I hope those of you watching in the comment section are curious about it. You should give it a go. You should at least try it. Don't knock it. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon saying this is garbage. Give it a go. It might be something you really enjoy. It might have games that you like. I didn't think much of it really, even though I had a PlayStation, but years later I bought one. I absolutely love it. This is a system that has something special to offer. So yeah. Anyway, that's Sega Saturn for you. Plug in the Sega Saturn still, even though it's not being made anymore. What does that say? So anyway, yeah, like Sir Dan said, find me. You can find me on our Sega Mega Masters YouTube channel that myself, Dan, and the other two brothers do together, and we talk and review passionately. We passionately review Sega Mega Drive or Genesis for you in America, and Master System games predominantly. Maybe in the future we might start reviewing games for some of the other legacy Sega consoles, but we're definitely a Sega Pro channel. And again, we have a gentleman from Bally Midway who we're going to be interviewing and talking about.
Ooh,
Very cool.
A big man.
something to look forward to. Yeah.
Again, he was responsible for games such as Rampage and Arch Rivals and General Chaos. So big titles. So looking forward to interviewing him. And you can find us again on the Sega Mega Masters channel. You just type in Sega Mega Masters with spaces on YouTube. You'll find us, and we've done a series of retro game reviews. So I think, it's a laugh of us just talking about the games and giving us our thoughts on retro stuff of that era. So if you're into that sort of thing, that's great. Or like Sir Dan said, you can find us on the Sega Genesis group on Facebook. Back to you guys.
All right, and I would like to have this opportunity to thank some of our partners. So Sir Dan and Sir Viraj already mentioned the Sega Mega Masters podcast show that is available on YouTube. Just go check them out. And we will also like to give acknowledge to Shuffle Emporium, Studio.ph, Retro Unlimited, and Retro Gamers PH. Yeah, and that's the show, guys. And as always, our games and our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain. Hey, timeless.
Timeless. All right. See you guys. Have a good weekend. See you guys
See you,
again next
boys.
time. Bye.
Ciao.